tiny people and we play with them. Ooh, ooh. We paint tiny people and we play with them.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Miniatures Monthly. My name is Chris Thurston and as ever I'm joined by Tom Senior.
Good day.
Hello, Tom.
Hello. Feels like it hasn't been as long as usual since we've meeting up this month.
Indeed. I think we've brought things forward a little bit, but not a lot, because we've been so sort of like we've been late so many times in a row that even being slightly less late than normal
feels like a novelty, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So yeah, we're gonna hopefully this will get us back on an even keel. And we're also recording a little bit differently this time. We're recording in an evening for once rather than after an entire afternoon of playing big games of Warhammer.
Yeah, see if you can detect it in our energy levels throughout the episode.
Well, do you reckon they'll be higher or lower?
Don't know, it's an experiment.
Indeed, yeah. But this is because we played a lot of Warhammer yesterday, which we will find out about a little bit later.
Yep.
When we get to it. But yeah, so I also suspect that because Warhammer Fest is this coming weekend or next weekend.
I think it's next weekend. I think it's
a weekend soon.
Yeah, it's coming.
That means that there's probably going to be another big old news tornado.
Yeah, because it feels like the Idoneth Deepkin releases are kind of coming to their sort of 3/4 stage or whatever, and there's going to need to be a new wave of announcements after that, presumably.
A new wave.
Oh no, because you said you did one earlier as well.
I know I did. There's basically, so this is one of the things that appeals to me about the Idoneth Deepkin range is that the ocean is such an unavoidable source of puns.
It's going to happen, I'm afraid.
I'm not going to skip too far ahead, but I did play against Idoneth Deepkin army recently, as did you. And my opponent asked me, do you have any splash spells? And I went like, ha, good one. He looked at me like, what?
Pun rejected.
Indeed. So yeah, so it's a bit of actually at least in terms of on the Warhammer front, actually relatively quiet month for news. Last month I know we talked about the kind of reveal of the Deepkin. And now they're kind of halfway through coming out. Like I think they're coming out very slowly. It's taking almost a month for the entire range to come out.
It's like a couple of boxes a week at the moment. I think we're getting the giant turtles next week. Mm-hmm. And I think they're like a £70 kit. They're quite huge.
I think that's the last of it.
Yeah.
This weekend, or maybe it isn't it. So this weekend is the Isharan, who are the kind of wizards and priests.
Oh yes.
So they're kind of on foot heroes basically. And the Achillean King, which is the guy who riding a big seahorse.
Yeah, he's cool.
And then next week is the turtle and maybe the shark. The shark chariot. People don't know what this range is. This is going to make it sound incredible, but yeah.
The eels, are they out yet?
No. So they're missing. Yeah. Because so it is very drips and drabsy at the moment, which is kind of, I wonder if it might have made a bigger splash had it all come out at once. But, bits and bobs have come out. And I sort of on a whim picked up the book. So maybe that's something we can discuss. I just showed it to you, Tom. So you could have a look. Partly because I really do love the models and I'm committed to my chain pile at the moment, but given that a Battle Force box around Christmas is probably likely, I wouldn't actually rule Idoneth out for me as a future army because I really now that I know the fiction and stuff as well, I really like a lot about them. It's really nice to have a bit like the Caradhran, like a new army, not a refresh or something, totally. But in the Stormcaster new army as well, but they're a couple of years old now,
They feel like everyone knows what they are. They can't be that surprising in these days.
Well, it could be. We can get to that as well.
Well, that's true. Though even then, like a new Stormcast chamber, they're not going to get away from those big units and those big shapes and those big stompy bases.
No.
There's a type of Stormcast that you're never going to see anything weird.
Yeah, and it's nice to have, I think I enjoy the process by which old fantasy ideas get kind of turned on their head and remade, and in this case, sunk to the bottom of the sea. So yeah, I was thinking about it. So I picked up the book, and I was also doing it partly because, it feels like it's been like this ever since the beginning of Age of Sigmar, but it feels like they're learning, or Games Workshop is learning what an Age of Sigmar battle tome book should be constantly.
Yeah.
That as soon as, proper, the Disciples of Tzeentch, I think, was the one that brought in proper, allegiance abilities and things beyond what was in the books previously. Or maybe it was the Sylvaneth book. Like, it's always, these ideas come in, but they come in from a kind of wonky angle. They don't quite have all the string that ties them together yet. And then the next battle tome comes in and sets another set of precedents that kind of then continues. And this book, and maybe Legions of Infagash, but I think it's more obvious with this because it's a new range. From a sort of top to bottom level kind of struck me as like, oh, this, well, not to get ahead, but like this feels like a battle tome that is designed to be compatible with a new version of AOS or a new phase in the game's life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of future proofed in a way that, you know, which is partly like the rules being missing from the back if they are really going to be updated. But it's also things like, it's got very clear kind of like very clear system of rules for, I think this is in Daughters of Cain as well, for like, having specific rules for different enclaves, which are the equivalent of chapters or storm hosts or whatever you call them. It has very few battalions that are much more generic, battalions being like, you know, the collections of war scrolls into a single lump, which suggests a change in direction for how battalions will be factored into army composition in the future, given they've been such a problem for the game in some ways.
Yeah.
Has all the war scrolls have new ways of, describing how command groups work, for example. And some of this stuff doesn't really change how the game works, but it feels like housekeeping. Do you know what I mean? Like it feels like someone's taken a critical look at how these rules were being written and updated it without changing fundamentally the fundamentals of the game.
Yeah, there are a few kind of key, almost wording changes you see in the recent battle tomes. The phrase "wholly within" is a very important one. So you have area of effect abilities that can only affect units wholly within the radius, which has not been the case. It's always been the unit within, which meant that the edge of a base could be within that, and you could daisy chain the unit off, you know, half a foot away from the actual radius from there. And that's what's led to a lot of kind of unusual and weird kind of army. If you got to the board of a really high level Age of Sigmar game, you're likely to see like long lines of troops just kind of screening off the backfield, or just kind of being, you know, having one unit within an important radius and the rest of them kind of daisy chaining off across the board. And there is actually like a fair amount of skill to positioning in that way. It's just a weird way for armies to behave on the tabletop if you're looking at a war game. Whereas wholly within forces units to be more coherent, cohesive, and within, you know, stay close to each other as though they're forming blocks in an actual army. Yeah,
exactly.
So that's just like a basic bit of housekeeping that I'd almost wish to see retroactively applied to the other battle teams.
Well, I kind of wonder about this because, I mean, I'm really excited for whatever's coming next. At this point, I'm 99.9% certain that there is a new box coming, that we'll see some big stuff for Age of Sigmar. I don't know whether that will qualify as a new edition or if they'll call it that, or if, you know what I mean, if that'll be a semantic distinction, don't know. But this stuff feels to me like it gives some weight to that idea, and also that, some of the specific ideas, I don't know if we mentioned this last month, but one of the specific ideas that I'd heard as a rumor for what might be included in a new edition, which I really like, is the notion that AOS might gain a kind of a similar system to like command points and stratagems that are already in 40k. But in place of stratagems, which are the kind of things you spend your command points to do, it would use the existing command traits of units. So, that's the, you know, if this hero is your general, then they gain this command trait in addition to inspiring presence, which is the battle shock one.
Right.
The weakness of that system currently is that, you know, it's a trade-off that doesn't always seem to like guide you very much. There's a lot of pressure on, there's probably a model that makes obvious sense to be the general of your army. And there's a couple of different things putting pressure on that, including, does it make sense that this model is my general?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I sort of feel that with Tzeentch. Like, if my Lord of Change isn't the commander of that army, who is? Like, it's clearly the most important, most powerful sorcerer on the battlefield. He doesn't take orders, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, that choice feels forced, but also Lord of Change has a very good command ability. So that's, you know, that's decision is easy. But that leaves a lot of like command abilities on the table that will never see use because those models will never be your general.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Khorne has this a lot because Bloodbound have loads of really cool heroes and they have loads of command abilities, but you always have to, you probably just pick the obvious one.
Yeah.
And you leave, and it's basically loads of rules that are just left on the table every game you play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if this is something feasibly the General's Handbook this year could add.
Yeah.
So a big problem for earlier ranges, so Stormcast, for example, there aren't that many command abilities in the armies at all. Like the there are a few that are very good. So there's, the Lord Celestin on Dracoth has a 24-inch bubble which makes people immune to battle shock. And that makes it very tempting to take. I think the Lord Celestin on foot also has different command ability, but apart from that, all the other heroes don't have command abilities at all. But in the way that the General's Handbook 2017 gave everyone allegiance abilities, perhaps a new General's Handbook could give armies new command traits for their heroes or something like that, or perhaps make it a more interesting and flexible system.
I think this is what is an interesting thing, because there's sort of a weird opportunity cost thing, and this is something that applies to Age of Sigmar a lot, especially as it currently exists, where, so presumably those heroes have to be given points that take the strength of their command abilities into account, because those command abilities are part of the scroll.
Yeah.
Right? However, being a general or not being a general isn't something that is acknowledged within the point system. So they're not all created equal in that regard. Like a weak command trait might as well not be there. Like, and that's one of the issues. And this also applies to artifacts and things as well, where often there's a correct choice, really. Like just one that's just better than the rest.
Yeah.
And I kind of like these ideas that bring a kind of in-game resource system, like a mana pool or something like that, to allow you to kind of temporarily use those things. So you dip a bit deeper into the rules that have been written. Like, for example, if there was a way for me to cycle through spells a bit, because I pick a spell for each of my sorcerers, and I'm obviously going to pick the good ones. And there's a lot of weird sort of thematic, janky things in those spell lists that just aren't, like, really effective enough to be worth using over something that just does loads of mortal wounds or something.
Sure.
But if occasionally it was possible to, like, spend a point to cycle a spell out so that I can get around the rule of one in a key situation or something, that might result. Basically, I just want to see the weird rules used more. And anything that allows you to fairly access them, I think is really, really cool.
Yeah. So Staunch Defender is a classic example of an ability that's so good that you just don't take any other abilities for Stormcast. Staunch Defender, basically, if you haven't charged that turn, you and your hero and every enemy within 6 inches of the hero gets +1 save, which
and
is
friendly within 6 inches.
Friendly, yeah. So it's just brilliant. It's just really, really good. And there's no reason you take it like other things that are quirkier and weirder, unless you're doing narrative stuff. I guess that's the
true. Spirit of the game versus reality thing. The reason I brought up the command trait thing is something that I noticed in the Idoneth where their command abilities are written when they have them. Several of them, and I haven't done all my homework to check if this has always been the case, but it really struck me as notable. A lot of the command abilities specify if this unit is your general. So they have some command abilities that specify you also have to be the general in order to use the command ability, which would be redundant wording under the current system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, only generals can use command abilities. So why would it say if this unit is your general?
Right.
And in fact, one of them, the lady, ocean wizard, the Tidecaster, she has an inherent ability that works if she is your general, but isn't called a command ability. It just isn't listed as one. It's just an if this model is your general ability.
Interesting.
So that suggests for me a bit of a division in what a command trait is and what a general ability is. Because that army has both, and in some cases they're exclusive to generals, and in some cases they're not, and in some cases they're not even listed as command abilities.
Yeah.
So, like, that's just an interesting kind of glimpse at the future, I think.
Yeah, interesting.
From a rules perspective, the other thing that stood out to me, and this, so everyone knows, like, the Idoneth can place currently a shipwreck, a Gloomtide shipwreck, that offers like a 6-up, ignore save to air friendlies and has potential to attack enemies with little fish. And this is referred to as an Etheric Vortex. And I realized something, and then I had a proper, like, oh shit thing that made a lot of things fall into place. So, Etheric Vortex, I assumed that the name of the Idoneth ability was Etheric Vortex, and then the shipwreck was an example of that. That's not the case. If you look at the wording for it everywhere, including on the store page, Etheric Vortexes are not an Idoneth Deepkin thing.
Right.
This is their specific one of them.
Right, I see.
So what I think might happen, I think a lot of existing army-specific magic terrain, like Wildwoods and the Scary Nurgle tree, will probably get retconned into being Etheric Vortexes, which will become a consistent game system rather than a kind of weird bespoke thing that lots of different armies have their own version of.
Right.
This, I think, would be the most sensible explanation for whatever the fuck that purple moon is.
Right.
So this is a complete guess. This is my complete guess. You know that new magic system they were teasing? I wonder if this is that. I wonder if that's how this works. This would be the obvious way to fix people's unhappiness with how the Balewind Vortex works. Because it is literally a vortex. Like, what if that became a, you know, I can imagine a system where armies have access to a selection of generic pieces of magical terrain that you can choose to take and deploy and incorporate into the battle setup. And then certain armies have exclusive ones, like Nurgle, Sylvaneth, and Idoneth. That would make complete sense to me. I'm completely guessing, but it's as soon as I realized that Etheric Vortex is a description of a type of thing. It's in the book, the way it describes the Gloomtide shipwreck. It's that you get access to these, and by the way, this is your faction-specific one. Makes me think that it's a much broader category of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. It'd be interesting if they chose go down routes, because starting with the Sylvaneth Wildwoods, there's been all sorts of rules shimmying required to actually get them to work on the battlefield, because you can't guarantee how much terrain is going to be on the battlefield, and actually ran into this in our games yesterday, like people placing large pieces of terrain next to other pieces of terrain, blocking areas off, that kind of stuff. Feels like it could end up being quite a fiddly direction, because blocking off areas of the battlefield is kind of an interesting, I mean, the Vortex can do it, the Bellwind Vortex can do it, looks like the shipwrecks can do it as well. And is that great to just like block off whole sides of a flank or something if you happen to have a certain amount of terrain? I mean,
I think it's an interesting one, because I think at the moment, like, AOS's terrain rules in terms of like, they're okay. And they can be interesting strategically, like the rolling to see what each piece of terrain do. But they're quite confusing. They're easily the layer of the game that you can lose and not lose loads of the experience.
Yeah.
And also quite often they feel very disconnected from the flavor of a game, right? Like, this piece of rubble happens to be deadly. I can kind of mind's eye. This piece of rubble is inspiring. This piece of rubble that looks the same is mystical. Like, that doesn't really, like, doesn't have, like, flavor with an A. You know what I mean? Like, it's not bouncing, the story of those games doesn't bounce off that system for me. Whereas a system where you had some generic terrain that were just line that's like, there were hills and ruins and stuff. And then you have a few things that you plonk down that really do something, and that's very specific to that thing. I think I'd prefer that system overall. I agree with you that if you end up mashing both systems together and you end up with hills that are magic next to shipwrecks that are magic next to magic forests, that gets overloaded with special rules for just walking around a corner.
And if you look at the last few releases, so Death have, so Nurgle have their Gnarl Root Moor.
Feculent Gnarlmoor.
Sorry, Feculent Gnarlmoors. Legions of Nagash introduces, grave sites.
Yeah, true.
And now Idoneth has the shipwreck. It does feel like that's a staple of all of this year's releases have been sort of terrain pieces, though grave sites technically are just points on the battlefield. They're not supposed to be like actual crypts or anything. It's a point where the dead come out of the earth. But it's definitely a way of, you know, it's definitely a kind of board control power that's being given to every faction this year so far.
I quite like that, because like one of the most sort of subtly interesting mechanics in X-Wing is the asteroid placement phase, where you take it in your turns at your opponent to kind of arrange where the obstacles are going to be, which maybe was intended originally as a sort of form of random distribution and is now regarded as basically turn zero. Is like, this makes a big difference, and you have to really think about it, and you have to think about which asteroids you bring and how you're going to place them, and because they can play against you and for you and that kind of thing. I like that kind of thing, that additional level of like board planning, particularly because this might encourage people to use one of AOS's actual rules that I very rarely see actually used, which is the roll-off to determine who deploys first also lets you pick which side of the board you want.
Right.
And these terrain features, these Etheric Vortexes, go down before that. So I think that's really interesting strategically. Like, you have to place your shipwrecks or whatever, not knowing what deployment zone you're going to get.
Yeah.
That should be a really cool strategic kind of depth multiplier, if that makes sense. If those things mean more, I think.
I think what I'm going to do is buy 3 more Knight Heralders.
Oh God.
And then the good times begin.
Oh God. Yeah, actually, I was thinking that the other day, like, just, oh man, it's starting to look a lot like Doot-Mas.
It is, yeah. The Doot meta's back, everybody.
Exactly. Oh, that's going to be the worst.
It is, yeah. It's going to be 3 honking, I mean, everything's going to be near terrain. Especially very large terrain pieces like those ships. Like, that is Herald or catnip right there.
Those ship rules are, like, so there are definitely things about the Idoneth Battle Tome that I think will get abused. Those ship rules are crazy loose. So the ship model, which is super cool, comes in 2 detachable halves. And the book actually specifies that you can treat that as 2 different pieces,
Right.
or as 1 piece.
So you can have 2 massive ones.
Yeah.
Right.
So when it says that the Idoneth can deploy 2 ships or 2 pieces of etheric terrain at the start, that can be basically up to 4. It's like, I mean, obviously they have to go together.
Have to go together.
But
So,
nonetheless, it's either 2 massive pieces or 2 small pieces. But that's a huge
They're
difference.
enormous. They're huge as well. Like,
Yeah.
you could block off all objectives.
Well,
with that,
so
right?
we'll get to this. There is a rule about how far away from Mother Teresa's train they need to be.
Right, okay.
So it is possible they wouldn't fit.
Okay.
That, we'll get to that. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, yeah, it's an interesting kind of distinction. I'd like to see where it goes. I'm kind of willing to entertain it. And you should be willing to entertain it because the magic fucking Doot-Man will win you every game from then on.
So good. I mean, there's a second variant of that model I've not painted yet, so that'd be an obvious purchase.
I just love the idea of these sort of slippery, haunted sea elves kind of like emerging from the mists next to their glooming, shipwreck, swarms of ethereal fish, and then just a man with a big horn goes honk, honk, honk until they go away.
Stormcast win again.
Speaking of which, there's a little bit of, like, we should talk about recently, I think, well, maybe even the most recent Malign Portent short story.
Yeah.
Gives our first glimpse at what's happening with them big gull wizards.
Yeah, so it's always been implied that the reforging process is painful, but there's a story on the Malign Portent site which I think is called Apotheosis, or the Apotheosis Chamber, or something like that.
Or the Pain of Apotheosis.
Pain of Apotheosis, and it's basically a blow by blow, literally hammer blow by hammer blow of how a soul is taken up back into Azure and reforged from the perspective of a new type of Stormcast character, someone with a stave, who is able to manipulate etheric energy and
specifically
Sigmar's,
the magic of Azir.
The magic of Azir.
The word magic is used, so yeah.
Yeah, so, and he's able to, it's basically, it's a story about a tortured soul who's been sent back down to fight, in, his old homeland, and is sick of it. He's really just sick to his golden teeth with, going back down over and over and over again. And, he tries to break out of the reforging chamber, and his spirit tries to escape and is wrangled back by this Stormcast wizard, basically, or warlock, or whatever you might want to call him.
Ghostbuster,
very Ghostbustery image. He's holding his stave out and zapping this kind of ghost and trying to force it back into the box.
Lightning Geist, I think it's called.
Yeah, Lightning Geist, that's right. And eventually gets him into this room. These giant golden doors slam shut, and you hear this really frantic hammering as the 6 smiths just like beat the shit out of his soul until it becomes a Stormcast again.
He walks out and it's just like, yeah, I'm fine.
Yep. It's the Robocop, basically. Like, he just comes up and he's like ready to serve.
There's a few interesting connotations of this. One is obviously the Stormcast wizard thing, but the other is that, so previously it's been thought that like losing your memories and things is just sort of part of the process. But the notion that he sort of actively like burns the emotion, he burns the memories that are causing the spirit to rebel out of it.
Yeah.
In order to get it back in the chamber.
Yeah.
That's a much darker concept of what's going on.
It's just a kind of horrendous conditioning, basically, which it kind of reminds me of the Space Marines as well. Like, there's always these parallels between Space Marines and Stormcast, and the Space Marines are basically treated to all sorts of psychological procedures to basically make them completely loyal to the Emperor.
Well, this is the thing, right? Like, ostensibly, Space Marines are recruited from like Necromunda style hive worlds and criminal gangs and people on death row and, like death worlds where everyone's a feral Viking man. And they all come out on the other side of that process as the most British man imaginable. So
they all come out as Mark Strong.
They all come out as Mark Strong on the other side of it. So clearly something's going on, right? You go in one end as whoever, like a Mad Max character, and you come out the other side as Mark Strong.
Yeah. And there's a very painful process in between. Yeah. And basically this is just the magical version of that Sigmar applies to his heroes, it seems.
I think that's the thing that we can maybe return to the Idoneth with as well. So it feels to me like they're kind of, tonally course correcting AOS as it deepens. Like they're changing things about the setting. They're kind of, making, and a lot of that stuff's good. And it's such an interesting setting. It's becoming a more interesting setting as it remains this kind of mad high fantasy world where anything's possible. But they're getting more specific detail. And I was impressed by the Idoneth book. Like, how much new art there is and how many kind of specific details. There's a spread dedicated to whirlways, which are these undersea realm gates that the Idoneth use, and where they all are and which enclave uses which ones, and what they look like. And that's a lot more specific detail than you normally get about how the realms work.
Yeah, it's cool.
You know, what they look like, you know, what kind of, it gives you ideas for like where your army could live, which is the sort of thing you usually get from 40k, like descriptions of planets.
Yeah.
However, there are things about it that do feel like this works in 40k, so let's move it across, right? Like, I'm okay for the Stormcast to have a dark side, but I actually quite like that they were a bit more human than Space Marines.
Yeah.
Like, from the start, they had a bit more humanity to them. And the idea that they can lose that is interesting, but I'd like, you know what I mean? Like, as they go down this path, I want them to avoid quite so much kind of, quite so many parallels.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff to be done with this. Like, you could get Stormcast to, basically have the mental discipline to steel themselves against the reforging process, almost in a way that, you know, if you're aware that problematic, quote unquote, problematic parts of you get stripped out, then you can condition yourself to think in a certain way, almost like a Big Brother doublethink style mental gymnastics. And so there's interesting kind of things that opens up for like Stormcast cults and the way that different Stormcasts react to Sigmar and kind of have, you know, because it is a two-way relationship as well. Like, this is the thing with Vander's Hammerhand and Sigmar, that it does go both ways. He does talk to his Stormcast, they talk to him, and they can react to him, and a lot of them are kind of wild, and, you know, a lot of them are Vanguard who are actually just in the realms and they're not getting reforged that often.
Yeah, true.
So there's still a kind of interesting, there's a lot of interesting things to be investigated regarding the distance between Sigmar and his various subjects, which can't really happen with the Emperor, because the Emperor is just a kind of
a skeleton,
yeah. And that's changed a bit with Guilliman and his return, but still, Space Marines are ultimately just blindly loyal to the Emperor, and that's the part of their character that can never change. Where it feels like there could be more flexibility with that.
That's true. That's an interesting point. I think the other thing that occurred to me is that one of the most interesting things for me in the Idoneth book about their fiction is, so it could be that they're really, really ramping up for a Slaanesh release this year, both in the sense of fiction, like he might escape, but also in terms of like the range and stuff, because Slaanesh is mentioned a lot in that book.
Yeah.
So much so actually that the thing it reminds me the most of is the Eldar. Like elves in Warhammer Fantasy have always had a relationship with Slaanesh. Like there's always been that kind of the excess aspect of them. And given that they've now really fundamentally merged dark elves and high elves into one race, basically one complicated race, which is much more interesting.
Yeah.
But what that means is that because all elves have kind of, well, one really crucial point is that Slaanesh didn't just eat all of the elves that were around when, the world that was destroyed. He ate every elf ever, apart from any that specifically escaped by other means. Slaanesh even raided the underworlds to eat every elf that had ever died. So, like, that's a lot of elves. And that means that basically every new elf, everyone that's been rescued from Slaanesh and remade, has a kind of shared, sort of trauma, to do with Slaanesh. And it's an inversion of 40k, because these are elves that are all born from Slaanesh, rather than it being the birth of Slaanesh that destroys the Eldar. But there are a lot of parallels in terms of like, the Idoneth are basically like, there's some stuff I really like about how they've handled this. So like, the Idoneth are basically like, they do some bad things, and they steal souls, and they steal souls to survive. But they're sort of a big key aspect of them is that they went into seclusion, and specifically to the bottom of the sea, as a kind of sensory deprivation exercise designed to shut them off from feelings, from sight and sound and smell. All of the kind of Slaaneshi excess, like the opposite of Slaaneshi excess is going to the bottom of the sea to hide and in the darkness, and to not want to feel anymore, because they don't just escape from Slaanesh and are fine. They're all marked by it. There's a thing that new elves suffer from, a condition called Malachi, which I think might be a kind of direct Malekith kind of like allusion, that is when they kind of just revert into a kind of feral hedonistic state. And there's this notion that, and it's written throughout the rules, and I really like this idea that like, they're kind of the dark secret of the new elf factions is that they're all only sort of, you know, they're all like a few slips of discipline away from lapsing into this kind of, Slaaneshi state that they can't escape anymore because it's fundamentally part of them, which I think is a really interesting idea. Like on the Path to Glory campaign table, you roll, like you can roll for like what kind of rewards your champion gets. And there's always like a really bad result if you get a double 1. I think for the Stormcast, it's like really scarred by reforging.
Yeah.
And for Chaos, it's like you just turned into a Chaos spawn. Sorry. For the Idoneth, it's they just go Slaneshi again. And you get to keep them, but someone else has to be on your general, and they never get to get glory ever again.
Oh, wow.
And you lose glory in the campaign.
Yeah.
Like, as a consequence.
Interesting.
Which is an interesting idea, and it brings that into the rules. But I like that idea that, like, it's no longer like we have the fetish elves and everybody else. It's like all elves have kind of fucked up now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of interesting kind of detail around that for the Idoneth and kind of how their society, because the idea is they've been around for millennia now, like in the mortal realms, and how their society has changed and been shaped by that, and the fact that they have to consume souls to survive. There's some other very Eldari things, like they store the souls of their own dead in coral reefs, so the Eidolons of Mathlan, the flying tidal wave wizard people, are actually not real beings. They're projections of a bunch of souls kept in a coral reef that then get expended at once. And the last form that soul remembers is the old dead elven god of the sea, because Mathlan is dead. Mathlan, like Cain, was eaten by Slanesh. So they're basically a kind of fantasy version of a Wraith Knight.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, like, that means they're not like, even though they're the biggest model in the range, they're not your general. Like, they're not your obvious general choice.
Forces of nature, aren't they?
Yeah. So there's sort of like flavors of stuff that have come before, but there's a lot of kind of interesting kind of where's this going next type deal. A lot more information about like Teclis and what he's like now. He controls basically this laser that exposes the truth, but is terrifying.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what scares the Idoneth into hiding at the bottom of the sea. Or maybe last thing on them. Who do you think their natural enemy has been for the last couple of millennia? Who are they fighting other than each other and sea monsters?
Down at the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah.
Silence.
Who's their favourite enemy, basically?
Nothing. Well, they need to go raiding souls, so I imagine they'd be quite predatory, and they'd be going after whatever the weakest faction they could find is nearby.
Sure. Okay, so not in terms of who they're prey, because they do prey on everybody.
Right.
Who is the only race to have ever actually, like, threatened them on their own turf? I'll put it that way.
Could be Tzeentch, I suppose. Doesn't go down there.
It's great.
Who is it?
It's only Skaven submarines.
What? Are they mentioned in the book?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
So Skaven using submarines and the hollowed out corpses of dead leviathans to sink to the bottom of the sea and crash into Idoneth cities.
Oh wow. Okay.
So basically, there's a really good bit in the battle tome sort of implied where basically, the Idoneth managed to stay secret for ages and then hide during the Age of Chaos. At one point, however, they raid for souls, and the Slanesh Keeper of Secrets tracks them down and discovers them, basically. And that's then a secret that Keeper of Secrets has. And being a Keeper of Secrets, it tells everybody.
Yeah.
Specifically, it starts, talking about and keeping this for himself. Then Archaon traps it and forces it to tell Archaon that there are these elves under the sea. At which point Archaon tasks the Skaven with doing this.
Right, okay.
Like solving this issue of find out what they are. So the Skaven just invent submarines, and they start also tunneling through the seabed and like sometimes just coming up in the wrong place and drowning. It's really good.
They're, in Dreadfleet, was it called? There was the old, a really beautiful one-off box set that Games Workshop did. The Skaven vessel in that was actually kind of a hollowed out corpse of an old weird sea whale. So it's cool to see that kind of coming back.
Yeah, and then sort of mixed with like Clan Skyer kind of mad Skaven submersible craft.
Yeah.
Like I love that idea. And
that's really, really, really cool.
There's a picture in the book of them fighting Skaven in their own cities, and it's just a mad, like, one of the enclaves is based on one of the ones that's based in the realm of beasts, I think, is based on the back of like a absolutely colossal sea creature that kind of moves along the seabed. and then Skaven got into it, and so they're always constantly, so that sea creature, which is also a city, has like an undercity now,
Inside
full of Skaven, inside the monster, which is like, that's pure AOS for me, where it's totally an old Warhammer idea, where it's like the Skaven lurk beneath, but it's like, they came down in little, adorable little diving suits or something, like.
How do they fight then? Are they in little, deep dive suits?
I think when they're in the cities, they're okay.
Yeah, okay.
But like, cause they have a way of merging sea and air. That's one of the things they do, because they do that to every battlefield they go on. It's why they,
so that's the kind of fog that
the ether sea, which is weird. Like, there's lots of like descriptions of like when they get attacked, like when Idoneth dies, it's blood, they don't spill blood. It mists out of them as if they were underwater.
Right.
Which is a really like evocative image. Like the fact that when they, sometimes the victims just look like they're drowning, and they drown in air. It's kind of like, it's really cool, kind of spooky ocean stuff.
Nice.
Spooky ocean stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of fish.
Wow. A weird faction.
It is a real weird faction.
Cool.
It's like, I'd like to get a few, but I'm going to wait till current projects are resolved and not in any rush, I don't think. We should talk about how our hobby months have been, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So is what we've been painting or what we've been playing?
Well, what we've been painting, what we've been doing up until yesterday, which we can do as its own special thing.
Yeah,
I guess.
sure.
Like, so, you and I played a game during the month rather than at the end of the month.
That's very true, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Can't go blow by it, but actually I was thinking it'd be interesting to talk about that as I feel that game, was A, interesting, but also B, like, felt like the beginning of a new part of our campaign, actually. I think we're ready to kind of pull the trigger on that.
The next phase,
Yeah.
Phase 2.
So we played a game, this was right after the end of Malign Portents as well, so the idea is that, the underworlds have opened, and I made a mixed Khorne and Tzeentch force so that I could use both, basically, and you had lots of Stormcast, basically.
Yeah, pretty standard Stormcast list, I think.
And the sort of fiction for this is that, like, I think the opening of those crypts and the return of all those souls, it was sort of my War Queen leading Khorne and Tzeentch and my Ogre Thaumaturge. So this brought a lot of people back to life, including my Ogre Thaumaturge, who I've not played with since the final game of our last campaign.
Yeah.
So as I'm concerned, this is his escape from the underworld, basically, and he's responsible for my army coming back in a big way. And uniquely among games that we have played, we drew.
We did. It was close as well.
It was
very close. Lots of tense moments that could have gone either way as well.
Yeah, really interesting. Like,
game.
We had a really interesting, the reason we drew is because we used the open war cards, and we had an interesting twist where we had two sets of objectives.
Yes.
And we each won one of them.
Yeah.
So we both won a different game of Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, at the same time.
But yeah, it was really cool. Like, it was really cool to sort of mash up armies, and it was very much an open play game, and I think it's open play with points, so not really worrying about battle line requirements and stuff. And I think it showed to me that, like, that totally works, I think, with the right attitude.
Yeah.
You could obviously,
you could power game that and it would be awful. But yeah, for what we wanted to do, it was perfect, really. So basically said Chris could have half and half armies, and the allegiance abilities would work for each of them independently, which strictly in match play you can't do, but why not, right? I mean, you might as well do it, and it didn't prove to be overpowered at all.
Yeah, we sort of had some, like, we house ruled some of that so that I could have, it basically means that Tzeentch isn't completely rubbish.
Yeah.
Because, like, without the spell laws, I'm so limited.
For sure.
But what it meant is, I can't use Destiny dice on the Khorne stuff at all. Yeah. Like, for that, so they're kind of dependent, it matters which army each is in. Likewise, the Khorne Bloodbound kind of abilities, the Blood Tide, had to go the other way as well. And it's really interesting. Like, to be honest, I can't remember huge amounts about specific things that happened now, because it's been a couple of weeks, but it was nice to get all this models on the table. I had to have the most cowardly Manticore who hid at the back for the entire game to watch for Vanguard Hunters. And then, to his credit, did fuck up a lot of Vanguard Hunters.
He did well.
He did. But nonetheless, given we had this idea of him as this kind of like craven knight who didn't get taken up by Sigmar, this might be why.
Yeah, so we were working on the idea that he was part of a group of, a squadron of
the way I think about
warriors.
It is like a kind of knightly order. Like, I imagine that during the Age of Myth, there's this knightly order of like Manticore riding knights that are genuinely a force for good.
Yeah.
And then when chaos invades, most of them die and get blasted up to Sigmar to be reforged, apart from this guy
who's carrying at the back of the board.
Exactly.
Centuries later.
And is now sort of trying to gloss that ever happened by positioning himself as a kind of heavy hitter for hire for roaming Chaos Warbands. Which I really like the idea of, but yeah, he's secretly a dick. But this does tie into somebody you've been working on.
That's very true, because of course, his fellow Knightly Order bins out to Sigmar, and I figured that indeed the rider of my Star Drake could be one of those knights. But one
like they do, who might be even the master of that order.
To be given a dragon that big.
It's a very big dragon.
He's a very big dragon. I think you'd have to be quite impressive to Sigmar. And you have to apparently go through a load of trials to actually get a Star Drake and do a load of, non-specific.
You have to grind a lot, get
activities.
a lot of rep.
Lots of, trust games, with the Star Drake, corporate retreats.
Just imagine doing like Trust Fall.
Trust Fall with the Star Drake.
Yeah. That guy constantly getting reforged.
I mean, that's been my hobby project for the entire month as well, but, which we'll talk about later, I suppose. But yeah, I figured that for the new phase of our kind of narrative campaign, this Star Drake rider is going to be probably the main general, the overall leader of the effort. He might not be in all the battles, but he's going to be kind of in a camp somewhere directing the Firestorm campaign.
Do you think that, like, he's been brought in to kind of like replace Tantris?
I think Tantris is benched a little bit. I think, that's Tantris is like an incredible warrior, and he's really fierce, and he's very good for, when you need a big blunt hammer to go kill a thing, and you could put him in charge of 10,000 warriors to go relentlessly charge a fortress over and over again. And Tantris now is capable of doing that, but he's not capable necessarily of doing much against the Tzeentchian plot, or he's not going to have the wherewithal after so many reforgings to be able to undo, the knots of chaos in a difficult scenario, a guerrilla warfare scenario where territory's changing hands all the time. So you might see Tantris coming in occasionally, just like a hammer blow, but, Sigmar needs smarter heroes.
He needs something a lot subtler. A colossal dragon.
Yes, exactly. A colossal dragon, but with hopefully a smarter guy on top. And, I've used I've done a heads up with him. So the leader of the Vanguard, Hunter box set, the Prime, has a really cool head, and it just looks absolutely perfect on the top of a Star Drake. So I'm going to come up with a name for him and a backstory, and, have him probably be an important character in our campaign to come. But I'm also working on, some other heroes. So like a brother and sister, and one is, a Knight Zephyros, and the other one is, an errant quester, which is a model you can only get from Warhammer World. He's like a really unusual kind of model. And they're going to be and his whole thing is that he can pick an enemy hero on the battlefield and duel them and be good at killing them, or he can absorb, wounds for another hero next to him. So the idea is the brother and sister, and he's kind of there to absorb wounds, and she's there to assassinate people. And, so that's kind of Sigmar's cutting scalpel that he's sending into this situation to try and eradicate dangerous rogue siege elements in this place.
Yeah, because we're kind of building towards, like, I guess, a kind of, and we are now building towards a kind of resurgence of those armies. My notion is that the Oggroth Armitage is kind of the link that he kind of gets out from the underworld, previously having been unable to die until he got really, really lightninged, and is now back and kind of like, re-encountering the sort of remains of that cult, that kind of like, that kind of, with the mark of that green flame and that sort of like magic song, and all, but magic song makes it sound a little bit more benign than it is. Like the kind of like music of the spheres that turns your entire civilization into gibbering horrors kind of thing. And he's kind of like piecing that stuff back together, literally. And that has resulted in the return of my Lord of Change, and that these sort of armies are now building again towards some kind of what, when we do the Firestorm campaign, like continent spanning kind of clash. I'm going to get in touch with community people about this as well, but this will also, now that we've talked about this quite a bit, like we can link this into things that are happening at the Minis Monthly Meetup, which is this coming weekend, I believe.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, it's going to be cool, I think, to kind of like give people the basic kind of situation and let things develop, which is a kind of neat sort of.
We're going to find some ways to let the community kind of feed back into our story and become part of the phase 2 story we're going to try and collectively tell together. Yeah.
So I'll put some information about this in the Discord, I think.
Yeah, that's
cool. Ready with it, cause like, I don't think, that's the idea, is that like this sort of phase 2 will be a bit more, collaborative, I guess.
Yeah.
Cause I want this to sort of culminate in like, when I finally finish them, my Zangor join the army, me gaining this big mortal contingent is going to be a kind of cool change, both for our games, but also for the kind of dynamics of that narrative.
Power, yeah. And I'm going to be moving into more Vanguard Hunters and, Vanguard Palador Riders, because, so I'm going to end up with a much more faster and more flexible force with a dragon, admittedly, at the helm of it, but versus a kind of almost more static infantry force. So it's going to be a very different dynamic between our two. And then, throw into the mixed chimps, Death Army. So that's going to be the third element in our Firestorm campaign. Given everything that's happened with My Importance, leading into Nagash and Nagash's presence in the area, like the Wartarks are going to be operating in the area. There's going to be some like cool mix up with Death as well.
Yeah.
And that's going to have some cool connotations of both of our armies as well.
And I have and I'm also going to, I'm treating my army for this as chaos, not necessarily Zinch.
Yeah.
So my little Khorne force will also make an appearance in this campaign as well.
Nice.
And then in the middle of it is what I perceive as my kind of trio of unaligned heroes who are the Manticore, Lord, War Queen, and Chieftain, who sort of flip between the armies.
Yeah.
They each have specific alignments, the War Queen's slightly more Zinch aligned and the Manticore Rider is more, Khorne aligned. And I actually see the Chieftain is more Slanesh aligned. But the idea is that, they are kind of also operating in this kind of theatre of war and I see my Khorne is kind of a small elite force and also a really highly religious force, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sort of evil Black Templars, if you will, always kind of crusading, but that's how they see it, is this sort of form of kind of worship to go out. And I mean, I suppose all Khorne forces see it as that to some extent, but I see this as much more
more
really
righteous, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, more and more sort of almost this, it's the opposite of Khorne, but I find this interesting to be and a sort of an ascetic, a kind of, what does minimalist Khorne look like? The reason I don't have any Blood Reavers and I don't really want any is because I don't see them as desperate cannibals, which also works for Khorne totally.
Yeah.
I see this more as kind of heavily armored sort of Khornate knights that just gather their tally of skulls, almost a big threshing machine that's on fire and covered in blood. But you know what I mean? So they're more of a kind of again, maybe a slightly more cerebral take on Khorne, because I just like wizards and I kind of want everything to be a wizard army, but nonetheless, I kind of like that idea as well. It'd be great to get all this stuff to smash together.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting.
How's painting your Star Drake been?
It's been very, very slow. After initially doing some of the very quick bits, dry brushing all the scales, which turned out great, I was riding high, and I was thinking, oh yeah, this will be done in pretty much no time. It'll only take a few weeks. But then you just have to drill down into all the little details in the model. And the Star Drake is an interesting one because he's got massive wings and they cover most of the model actually. But it means that you have to finish every aspect of the core model before you glue those wings on. And you pretty much have to finish the wings separately as well, especially if you're going to be doing kind of star patterns and stuff on them. You just have to freehand those on a table. So it's been a lot of just kind of going back to it and just staring at it for 10 minutes and then making a list of all the little details that still need doing. So I'm down to teeth, the tongue needs cleaning up, claws, the sort of the rocks he's standing on. But the end is actually in sight. And, I had loads of fun over the weekend doing detail on the wings, because the wings are almost finished now on one side, adding loads of starscapes to them and loads of little kind of pinpoints of light and colour, in amidst the actual membrane of the wings to actually make them look like a star drake or a creature of the stars. I'm really pleased with the result of that. Unfortunately, I've got to flip them over and do the underside of both of them, which is going to be another day's work.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. I like the by the time we get to the end of this, we will both have had this experience of drawing stars on wings, specifically, and then realizing every wing is two surfaces.
It's two surfaces, and it is a lot of plastic. It's a lot of space to cover. And I'm not doing anything particularly ambitious. I think it looks good, but it's a fairly simple formula. It's just the number of glazes it takes, the number of kind of gently getting the gradient on it, and then the stars as well. It's just it's a lot of work. It's just have to put the time in, put some podcasts on, and get through it, kind of thing. It's going to look awesome when it's done. It's the armor's pretty much done. The gold is pretty much done on it, and that looks great. And you're starting to see it come together. And now, almost the closer you get to completion, the more glaringly obvious the unfinished bits are. And, so it's just going to be about getting the teeth right and the claws right and the getting my general's face right. That's also something I'm dreading, because that's something you just got to get as good as possible.
Yeah.
And then one day I'll glue those magnificent giant wings on him, and I'll finally get to see what the finished model looks like, because it's very hard to hold everything in place and know what the Star Drake is going to look like before he's done.
I almost holding off that moment a little bit. Yeah. I did this with my Lord of Change, where I kind of would occasionally allow myself a little cheat of what it's going to look like on the base, because I painted it off the base as well. So it's you know, there's a lot of like waiting and kind of fiddling and like, I think I said this at the time, but like I stabbed myself with every single part of that model, kind of holding it and rotating it. And then there's a moment where you can finally, when it'll finally stand up on the base and you step back and look at it and it's like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
like, and definitely when like, I always find like there's a point where as long as anything on the model isn't base coated, as long, you know, as long as anything on the model is still grey or whatever your color your primer was, you can't see the model yet.
No.
You can just see a itemized list of jobs at different states.
Yeah.
And then there's a moment when everything is at least base coated where it's like, oh, model. That's what I really like that moment.
Yeah. I look forward to that moment. I still feel like it's going to be a way off. Feels like the Star Drake's been on my bench for a couple of months now almost. Just because I haven't had like a huge amount of time to actually go and do it.
Well, my Zangor have been on my desk since the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Like,
it's just one of those big projects. But it's a centerpiece model and it's got to be, it's something you're going to be looking at a lot and feeling proud of. I feel like I have to put the wings on it and just to get the kind of balance right. So I don't want the stars to be overwhelming. And a lot of the Star Drakes I see online kind of, they do like mad lightning patterns and stuff on the wings, which like look really cool, but end up just like being the first place your eye goes. And your eyes shouldn't go to the wing first. They should go to like the face and the rider and stuff. And, you also kind of want to get a sense of how the overall impact of the model is going to look once it's done.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be fine. I think it's going to be pretty rad, actually.
It's going to be really
pretty
cool.
pleased with where he's going. Yeah. It might be finished by next time, I think.
yeah. Well, hopefully by the time we next
finished.
record, I'll also have my Zangor done.
Yeah, sweet.
So the next battle's a big one. Like,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that'd be an interesting.
like you should start planning for
Meet up.
2,000 points.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure. After this, I'm going to do the two heroes I described earlier, the brother and sister heroes, and I'm going to do something different with their armor. They're going to be like black and gold, so set
cool.
them out. So they'll have come from like a different place and, you know, matched up with this army for their talent. They're kind of like special forces almost is how I think of them.
Right.
Sigmar's realm. So they're going to be black and gold. They have a bit of blue with them to tie them in, but they're going to be their own kind of thing. And after that, it's going to be the Vanguard Paladors, which is going to be another huge project. And I'm going to need to devise a whole way of painting those, beautiful chicken riders. And I've got an idea. I want to do like almost like tiger stripes, but with actually using brushwork to imply the fur.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Yes.
That sounds hard.
And it's going to be hard, but if I get it right, because those models are so amazingly dynamic, they're so good.
Yeah, they're great.
The flow of the fur and those like little brush strokes will hopefully exaggerate that sense of motion and the sense of, you know, being like a cheetah mid-flight, that kind of look. And that's kind of in my perfect mind's eye view of what these will be like. It looks amazing, but I need to learn some techniques to do this.
Yeah.
And get it right. And it's going to take a long time.
I think it's okay to have that though, like in your back pocket. Like you have to be able to work at different speeds, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always got some little Sylvaneth to pick up if I get bored and just
a dry brush, a treat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel good about that quick project I did.
So I've had a bit of a kind of mixed month because I spent a lot of time on the Zangor. And then, I decided that I just wanted to like, I knew what I wanted to do with my blue horrors. I just hadn't gone around to doing them. I knew I had to do them. So I just did them. And actually it's the quickest, so you've seen them now because I've had them with you. Yeah. I assembled them. We're recording this on Monday night. I assembled them Friday morning, and by Sunday morning they were all finished.
Sweet.
Which is 20 blue horrors, which
there
is
you go.
it was kind of nuts in terms of speed. So I think the main thing I learned was just like, there are things I'll return to about them that I want to tidy up. I haven't quite done yet, but they're certainly tabletop ready. And in fact, weirdly, like, the two of my models that if it wasn't already obvious, and we'll get to it in a minute, we were at an event yesterday. The two models I had that got like a compliment during the day, one was the Lord of Change. It took me 3.5 weeks to do one model.
Yeah.
And the other were the Blue Horrors, which took
Really?
a day to do 20 of them.
Oh, that's awesome.
And not even a full day, like 2 sessions over the course of a day.
Yeah,
Obviously
that's
a play on Saturday afternoon. Like, and so I think I do feel like I've plateaued in some ways. Like since the beginning of the year, those Zangor have just been sitting there and I do a stage and it's a lot of work. I'm doing 30 at once and they're a complicated model.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'll do, you know, and I'm getting to the stage now where base coating is going to require multiple coats. So I'm doing, you know, I'm midway through the second Celestra Grey undercoat for skin, which is a couple of steps away from even really shading the skin. So it's just going to take time. I'm going to get there this week, I think, with a lot of them, but I've been working on, so doing something else quickly was nice. And like, I think like things like the Corn and the War Queen particularly were models that like I've spent a lot of time on. I'm really pleased with.
Yeah,
and they were nice. But like, I'm sort of in this funny place with my Zinch, I think, where it's like, I want this army done.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to look good when it's done. But also, I feel like somehow, because a lot of the techniques I came together to paint them, I'm still doing, because it makes it look consistent. I'm changing some things, but not loads. Mean that like, not only have I plateaued a bit as a painter and haven't gone up loads, I feel like I won't necessarily go up a step with this army. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, there are going to be individual things I do better, but like, I feel like I can now conceive of this project and this army, which will be north of 4,500 points by the time I'm done. Like, kind of being, always my first army, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
it'll look perfectly good, I think. You know what I mean? It's perfectly tabletop ready. It's never going to be like, oh man, like my stuff I did when I was a teenager. But I feel like it'll be the project after this one, where it's like, I mean, to be honest, I already see this with my corn, where it's like, these are just a more interesting color scheme and kind of hold together better as a group. Which is not to be too disparaging, but it was sort of felt like I'm sort of letting myself speed up with a lot of stuff, because it's like, when this is done, I can look at it and figure out what I want to change and what I want to improve and what I want to keep and so on. But I'm not going to get there until they're actually just done. So I guess my kind of, I don't know if we can totally do like learnings from this month, but one of them was just like, I came up with a way of speed painting blue horrors, and I was really just really pleased with how it worked. I think that's, and like, I think the most important thing for me is basically it saves so much time, particularly on a model like a blue horror that has a really clear base color, to start with that base color. And if you can't easily start with that base color, figure out a color scheme that lets you do it. So with the blue horrors, they don't look like this has happened, but the way I did their skin really quickly was base coating them the Fang, which is grey blue. Yeah. And then dry brushing them up through the kind of Space Wolf colors, basically. So rust grey, then Fenrisian grey, which takes them to a kind of light bluey grey color. And then, glazing them with undiluted Guilliman blue, which shifts the entire model into what would otherwise be like the ultramarine blue, Macragge blue kind of range tone. And it's so much quicker. Like, you couldn't do an ultramarine this way because they're too, angular. Like, it requires the kind of organic shapes of a horror. But that meant that like reasonably good looking skin, which is 90% of those models, was possible with a spray, 2 lots of dry brushing, and a glaze, which is so much quicker. So much quicker than base coating them. It's so much quicker than sort of trying to shade and highlight normally, that I saved days of time. Like, and the effect really, in terms of how much time models spend on the table, is not much different. Right? You wouldn't necessarily tell, like, my pink horrors are base coated, shaded, washed, and layered and stuff. They don't necessarily look that different. Right. And that just comes from being a bit smarter about how to pick spray paints, basically. It makes so much difference. It makes so much difference.
That's interesting.
And now I think I would actually almost approach armies or prospective projects knowing what kind of spray paint, not necessarily even a GW spray paint, like, but what spray base color I can use, because base coating is certainly my least favorite part of painting. Yeah. It's the thing I find most disheartening when you're kind of midway through it. I'm definitely there at the moment with the Zangor. So being able to take that step away and not lose anything in terms of the overall quality, particularly for line troops, for kind of big blocks of things, makes such a big difference that I really want to stick with it. The obvious answer to this is get an airbrush, you idiot, because then you have the full range available to you. But short of that, and that's a big investment, hundreds of pounds that I don't really want to spend right now. Short of that, this has been a really useful thing to kind of figure out, I guess, is that like, and I'll plan probably future projects this way as well.
Yeah, cool.
Whenever I'm looking at like 40 models or something, I'd like to figure out which of these colors is the most useful one to spray. Is an interesting question to ask yourself. Yeah.
Pre-finished,
Or which of these colors am I going to hate doing by hand the most? And then spray it that color and then deal with everything else.
That reminds me, I painted a Crimson Fist this month as well. So I just had my Space Marines hanging around, and I knew I wasn't going to paint any Space Marines for ages, so I thought I'd just do a Crimson Fist test model, because I'm still like torn, and I still love my Crimson Fists.
I'm still torn as well.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I really enjoyed painting the Crimson Fist, and it was pretty much just like Cantor blue, and the rest of the highlights are just mixed. So it was various degrees of Celestra grey, mixed in with Cantor blue, and then with varying degrees of kind of line highlights and everything, edge highlights and all over the place. And it was actually, I felt like my brushwork got better by the end of it. Like, it was really good edge highlighting practice. Right. And just because the Primaris are quite tricky, actually. They're not like if you're going to design, a beginner army, for new painters, you can just like base coat, wash, and dry brush Primaris, but really to get the most out of it, you want to kind of be edge highlighting all of those armor panels to make them pop out. And so that's actually deceptively difficult, even though there's not like huge amount of detail on those models. That edge highlighting challenge is actually very, very good practice if you want to get better at it. I mean, I'd probably just buy a couple more Primaris and just practice going around the edges with the brush, getting the right consistency of paint on the brush, and also just, I'm learning to press less hard with the brush almost, because the harder you press, the wider the line is, to actually just let the actual very, very tip of it just touch it and sort of guide it around.
An heavy metal whisper.
Exactly. Just stroke it. Yeah. And so the edge highlighting on this has been much cleaner than anything else I've done previously, just simply because I was paying attention to that and actually thinking about it as a lesson. So I think actually when you're doing something like thinking, instead of just kind of getting it done, thinking, okay, I'm going to try and actually nail this as best as I possibly can, and sort of always get the muscle memory for it. Like going around the bottom edge of a, Primaris's lower kind of armor leg, just below the kneecap. That's like one of the hardest bits to do.
Yes,
just basically have to freehand it pretty much. The model itself doesn't help you out very much with that. It's actually quite a shallow, impressions around there. So it's just like brush control. And I think the only way to get better at that is just to do it over and over again.
Yeah.
And the more I do it, the more I realize it's not even like a talent thing. It is just do this a lot and you will get better at it by doing it. So, I mean, I dread doing that for 10 of them because it took ages. But again, maybe like the next thing I could look at is, achieve the same quality, but half the time. Like,
exactly. Like, how much of this do I need to do to get the effect is an interesting question.
So it's almost like a training, sort of turning it into a game, like how test models are really liberating for that. That's why I like to very occasionally buy like one of those sort of £10 starter boxes where it's just some push fit models. And I do that for like Liberators, and I've done that. I'll do that for Primaris as well. Just because I just want to paint something and get good at a technique, and I'm just going to do it on this model and base coat it, and it's going to be done in a few hours, and I'll be pleased with it because it'll look good.
It's a nice, like, I mean, so much of the stuff is just practice, right? Like, I think that's maybe the thing that like, all of my sort of techniques I've developed for Tzeentch, this I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I feel like I know those techniques now, so I can just do them faster. Like, I'm so much faster. But like, in order to go up to the next level, I need some new techniques. And these models probably aren't going to be the ones where I find them. Totally. Because I've got my way of doing them now. And they can be improved, but that's a different method to like finding a new technique or something like that. Like, one of the reasons I really like to do Deepkin eventually is like, I'd like to do an army with no metals, because I've done so much metal. Yeah. Like, my idea for doing Deepkin one day is to do no metal whatsoever. Like, everything being made of coral.
Coral, isn't it? Yeah. I love that they've left that open, because a lot of the heavy metal, schemes interpret that coral as metal. Yeah. It's almost like shaded metal, but you totally just do it with any colours, any coral colours you wanted, and it would look great. Like, it's obviously been designed that way, hasn't it? To take that type of
one
colour.
Of the enclaves specifically has coral armour.
Oh, cool.
And so they're kind of intended to be painted that way.
Yeah.
And they have some suggestions for like how you can use the natural patterning of coral, like stippling and stuff over them, which metal wouldn't normally do. And that's an amazing
it's a great idea.
degree of freedom. Like, the combination of both organic shapes and shaped kind of elven designs is super cool with that range. Like, it's one of the things I like about them.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, no, totally. So yeah, the next couple of weeks for me looks like a big sprint to get ready for London GT. So that's what I'm kind of leaning into. But,
do you have your army list set for that?
Pretty much.
Nice.
Although, we can get on talking about this, I guess. The Ogre Thaumaturge did a lot of work for me yesterday. Yeah. And he's not currently featured in the army list. So I'm trying to figure out what I need to move around to make space for Big Bullman. The underrated is his new epithet, I think.
Yeah. He's always been good.
He has always been good, but like, I think he's not considered like competitively that great, but actually, no, and he wants to.
Yeah, I think, it's because people will take a unit of Skyfires instead of that, I suppose. And if you had a unit of Skyfires, I imagine you'd probably take.
And I will do.
Well, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, get ready for that.
Yeah.
That's coming.
So, I mean, for tournaments, I mean, I could see each player just, why would you take an Ogroid over a unit of, another unit of Skyfires? Because it's similarly pointed, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, because I'm leaning towards being a little bit more competitive than I normally am, but also, I still really do stick within the kind of, this has to feel like an army sort of thing. Like, the kind of army I can't do, both personally and in terms of expense and stuff, is just the good units, please. It's the 3 Lords of Change. Right. 2 units of Pink Horrors to meet Battle Line, shitloads of Skyfires, like that sort of thing. Can't quite do that. Can't quite bring myself to do that. Don't want to paint another Lord of Change, to be honest. Like, but, yeah, there's definitely a middle ground, which is being slightly more competitive, but still having like army composition in terms of it looks like an army in your head.
Yeah.
So definitely moving in that direction. Shall we talk about what will stand in for a battle report this month?
Yeah.
Which is instead...
Many battle reports. Many.
Which is instead basically 8 battle reports.
Yeah. Let's try and remember them all. But we went to a tournament yesterday.
We did.
1,000 point tournament at Bristol Independent Gaming, which is lovely if you're near and you want to do some more gaming. They've got loads of tables, loads of systems, and it's rad. So
give
it a little plug there because it is very good.
It is very good. I've been going there for years for X-Wing. I know the owner Jim pretty well, and I like it there a lot. It is in the middle of nowhere to some extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yesterday we went down to a 1,000 point, Age of Sigmar tournament. It's the first time you and I have been to an event.
Yeah.
Together, which is nice.
It's my second event in like a month as well.
Yeah. Pretty hardcore.
Love it.
And, Chimp joined us, so.
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice for us to kind of compare our thoughts and armies ahead of the Firestorm campaign as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Because Chimp brought, a very funny, death army, which we'll get into.
So yeah, so I think obviously we're not going to be able to do turn by turn for every single game we play.
No.
But we should go back and forth, I think, talking about each of our first games. Because
sure.
we also shared some opponents as well.
Yes.
So, should we start off with your first game?
Yes. So,
actually, no, what we should do is start off with what our armies were. I think that's probably...
Good point, yes.
Yeah.
So it was 1,000 points, and I basically took the 1,000 points I took to the doubles tournament with Chimp. So, it was 2 units of adjudicators, which are the archers. It was a unit of fulminators, just 2 of them, the dragon cavalry, who are very good in the game. The general was Lord Castellant, whose job is to shine a lantern and make the saves better on the fulminators. And there was also a Celestant Prime, which may or may not have been a good choice for this tournament. We shall see.
So I took, so also I should say that like I consider every game I play with my army to be part of the story.
Yeah.
So even though these were like tournament games, this is still, part of this campaign, part of this new campaign that we're starting. So, your Lord Castellan is my previous Chaos Sorcerer Lord, who was killed by Galmaraz and reforged in our previous campaign. So this for me was the return of my Lord of Change. So the army was led by my Lord of Change with 2 units of Pink Horrors, the Gaunt Summoner, the Ogre Thaumaturge, so almost like the core of the Silver Tower kind of leadership cadre.
Yeah.
Like they're still around. A block of 20 Brimstone Horrors, and 100, reinforcement points left over to be used either for a Balewind Vortex or for the first time to let me split any unit of a unit of 10 Pink Horrors into 20 Blue Horrors when they die.
Right.
And that was a bit of freedom that I added because previously when I put aside 100 points, it was always for a Balewind, which is very good against hordes, but a little bit weaker against minimum strength units like Stormcast, or minimum size units, sorry.
Yeah.
Whereas Blue Horrors are very good and they make the tar pitting a lot easier. So I gave myself a little bit of flexibility. But yeah, so that was the armies. Let's talk first game for you.
So they basically asked us to pair up with whoever in the first round, and I went straight for the guy who brought an Idoneth army and obviously hastily kind of put it together and sprayed it, and it was totally just undercoated and grey plastic. But I mean, those models have only been out for a week or two, so I leapt at the chance to play against the shiny new thing.
Yeah.
And what was the first scenario? It was Star Strike, which is the one where
objectives come down one comes down at a random part of the middle of the board, and then the turn after that 2 more come down in each player's territory, again in random places.
Yeah, that's right. And it was an interesting game, and I was just really fascinated to see the play against the rules of the Idoneth. And he had the aspect of Mathlan, which is the Eidolon, and he had the wizard variant of it, not the kind of combat variant. You can build them in 2 different ways.
Yeah.
He also had 2 squads of Namati, which are the very tasty kind of basic units for the
melee people.
Melee people. They've got like 1 rends. They if they're fighting things with 1 wound, they get extra attacks. If they're fighting things with more than a certain number of wounds, they do extra damage. So they're actually they scale in different ways to different units they're fighting, which is a really cool way of showing elven expertise in combat. You know what I mean? Which I really liked. And he also had a unit of the Sword Masters of Hoeth, which is an old school high elf unit, an elite high elf unit, and they're very good kind of anti-shooting because they can chop arrows out of the air, and they're also relatively punchy in combat, but kind of not that great anymore. And yeah, I think that was his entire army. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some interesting rules things here.
Yes.
Which I was going to cover earlier talking about Idoneth, because when I went back and looked at the book, so, there's he declared that his army was part of the Iron Rack Enclave. Their special ability is, their special ability, one of them is a command trait that your general has to take. His general was the Eidolon, which means that your allies benefit from the Tides of Death ability, which is the Idoneth special Tides thing. The thing that's really interesting about this is, so the reason the Swordmasters were so good, presumably against your Judicators, is Idoneth have a army-wide special rule called Forgotten Nightmares that mean that you can't shoot at an Idoneth unit unless it is the closest unit.
Yep.
So Swordmasters, which can chop arrows out of the air, really good at absorbing ranged fire. However, this is one of those moments of like, oh, hang on, will this get FAQ'd? So according to that Iron Rack Enclave ability, the allies get the Tide special rule. They do not get the Forgotten Nightmare special rule.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
However, the way the Forgotten Nightmares rule is worded means that you can't target an Idoneth unit if there is a closer enemy unit.
Okay.
So they technically don't need it in order to screen for other Idoneth units.
Right.
However, later in the same book, in the tactics guide, it specifies Idoneth for both.
Okay. Yeah.
So whether that's actually legal, honestly, that player's reading of that is fine, but the book is a little bit unclear. And because it's a potentially powerful source of synergies with having given that you have this army-wide shooting restriction, being able to take anything from any other order force, not any other order force, but lots of them, and stick them in front of your army as a kind of inkillable shooting buffer is potentially a source of min-max hell.
Yeah, we'll see how that pans out, because it definitely feels like there's some wording to be clarified one way or the other at some point there. So you had so this big unit of Swordmasters obviously just marched them up the centre of the board, because I also had a very shooting heavy army anyway, with the two units of Judicators of the battle line, and they had no choice but to shoot the Swordmasters, and the Swordmasters were kind of mystic shielded up obviously, and they had their kind of minus to hit ability for their chopping stuff out the air, and they're also just variously buffed by spells and stuff as well. And also, in the first round of Tides of Death, I think you get the +1.
You're in cover anyway.
In cover anyway as well, out in the open. So they were just impossible to kills. And I had to shoot them, so I tried just to see what the dice would do. And, I think just nicked one off. And then the objective came down in the dead center of the board where the Swordmasters were. And at that point I had to just charge the formulators into them and try and just clear out the center and actually just give my archers the ability to access the rest of the enemy army. And they got the charge, and I'm getting better at actually getting the charges I want with fulminators, which is a key part of actually having them in your army, because on the charge they have 3 damage, and that's where they tend to clear off units. They killed all but 2 of them on the charge, and but then they got swarmed by the rest of the army, and then the turn 3 happened, and that's high tide for the Idoneth. And when high tide happens, they get to attack first, not just in the enemy's turn, but also in your turn subsequently in the combat phase as well, because that high tide just lasts for all of turn 3. So the fulminators went down at that point. So I was still able to shuffle across with my archers and take the objective in my territory. The objective was firmly in the Idoneth's, the central objective was firmly belonged to the Idoneth, because it had 2 units of normality around it and the 2 Swordmasters, and the Eidolon was just in the center as well. So I brought the Prime down on turn 3, I think, in their backfield, and he had run across a unit of Nomata to try and protect that point, but my Prime charged them and wiped them out completely. And at that point I had 2 of the 3 points, and the number of points you score is depends on the turn that you're in. Is that right? So yes. If you earn points towards the end of the game, because it's basically a comeback mechanic, is saying that if you have a late game swell, you can actually take a couple of points and get 10 points on the board and actually take him off. And if I'd have had the double turn there, which was like a possibility, I would have won the game, because I would have just had it with the Prime, had 1 point with the Prime, had 1 point with the Judicators, and scored loads of points, and actually gotten too far ahead for him to really deal with it, even if he did come across and kill my Prime. But I lost that. The Eidolon came over, and kill the Prime, which always tends to happen. And that was game over at that point, really. But it was an interesting game. The Sword Masters did it for me, really, because without that shooting output, able to go into the rest of the army, then it's very hard for me to clear off the bodies that he needs to actually take the points.
Yeah. Yes. Spoilers, I had some experience with the same army a little bit later in this event.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, did you finish all 5 rounds?
We did. In fact, every game I finished 5 rounds within an hour. But that
amazing.
Was because I had a very
I got to the end of round 2 in that game.
Really?
Gosh. Yeah.
God, that was a lot of abilities firing off and stuff.
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, I do feel like 1,000 points and, 4 foot by 4 foot boards could use a few considerations when they design match play scenarios, but we'll get to that. So my first game was, against a chap called, Ben, who does a 2 Peas in a Pod podcast, I believe. Actually, I haven't listened to, I have to confess, but like, he was a super nice guy and he got best painted, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah,
really,
orcs,
really
right?
lovely.
Iron Jaws, right?
Really lovely Iron Jaws. And so, and we both had quite a relaxed, casual kind of attitude, to the game. Same scenario, but we were playing on a board with a huge mountain right in the middle of it. So we had to sort of split. And, for me, this game was like a real, kind of, like proof that every army building thing I'd made, every decision I'd made about stuff to add was the correct decision. Cause it was very much a kind of minimum size unit, Iron Jaws force, with the boar riding people and the brutes and stuff.
Yeah.
And, so in this scenario, Balewind is actually not that good. So I held my points back and I arranged my Brimstone Horrors in like a long line in front of my army as a screen, between 2 pieces of terrain. And he got the first turn and he pulled off the thing that, happened to me the first time I played Iron Jaws, actually, at Cardiff last year, which is, he didn't get there with his whole army. Some things were lagging behind, but his brutes and his gore grunters, the boar-mounted cavalry, both got to move twice during the hero phase, thanks to the destruction stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then the gore grunters made an 11-inch charge and the brutes made 10-inch charge on natural dice.
Gosh.
Which got them into my Brimstone Horrors, his first turn. Which was like, previously when I played against them, that's always into pink horrors. It's always into something relatively sensitive that I need, for tempo reasons, to keep the game going, I need to hold on to. They hit the Brimstone Horrors and they wiped out the Brimstone Horrors completely in that turn. They killed all 20 of them. But the Brimstone Horrors hilariously did manage to wound a Gore Grunter, which is like good for them.
Yeah.
But they'd completely done their job. That was 80 points of my army gone. But then suddenly it's my turn.
Yeah.
And suddenly those brutes and Gore Grunters are just sat in front there within my very short magic bubble, my 18-inch magic bubble of everything.
Yeah.
And the rest of his army is miles away. And it was just like opening up the sort of like, okay, who wants to go to space? Who wants to be on fire? Who wants to be on fire and in space? And then as sometimes happened in AOS, I got the double turn. So suddenly, like, actually, did I get the double turn? I think I did actually, because I wiped out those 2 units and that was a big chunk of his army. A lot of the rest of the stuff was lagging behind. I think so anyway. No, I didn't actually. No, what happened was I did loads of damage. I think I wiped out all the Gore Grunters and I got them down to like 2 brutes left, swarming in loads of pink horrors, trying to get towards the objective. Then for us, took quite a while to get to the start of round 2. When we got to the start of round 2, I lost the roll off and the objective came down right in the middle of the board, which is like on top of this mountain. And we weren't sure about how to resolve that.
Right, yeah.
So what we said was that the mountain, which was this huge kind of monolith thing, would be the objective. We realized at this point on the clock that we probably wouldn't get to round 3.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, let's just, we've each got a chance to score this in our own turns. Fight for this mountain. Being 3 inches of this mountain, you're capturing it. So he ran all of his, Ard boys, I think, the kind of generic
the normal ones, right?
line. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were hugging it basically. So 10 of them were hugging it. And my pink horrors couldn't quite get to it. And then he got his war boss across the battlefield and smashed him into the pink horrors and annihilated the pink horrors in the combat phase, killed them all before they could fight back.
Yeah.
But I wanted this to happen, and this is the most Zinchi thing that's ever happened for me, because when they die, end of the phase, I spend my reinforcement points to split them into 20 blue horrors.
Oh, nice.
And when they split, they have to be split within, the whole unit has to be wholly within 6 inches of the last horror to be removed.
Right.
So the last horror I removed was the one closest to the objective. 6 inches got me completely onto the objective, and I just split all the blue horrors onto the objective. Nice. So that wasn't important because it let me score it. It switched it off for him. And it gave him the huge problem of like, you have to get me off it.
Yeah.
Now, we're not going to draw at the end of this game. Now I'm ahead. Which was really nice, like, that, the being able to choose between blue horrors and the Balewind won that game.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really, really cool. That's really cool.
What was cool, however, was on that turn, so I actually, like, I often feel like one of the things I don't like about playing Siege is I play Siege because I love the fiction and the models, but because it's been like a top tier competitive list for a long time, and because people don't like being mortal wounded to death by spells.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, it's not that different between mortal wounds to death by anything in the game. And there's a lot of mortal wounds in the game, but I actually heard it during the day. There's sometimes that whispers of like, oh, Tzeentch again. And it's like, it makes my heart sad every time I hear that, because it is just my army. Like I don't want to feel bad about running it.
No.
But occasionally when you get to do the tricks, you want to do the tricks. And so, I gave my general the command trait that, my Lord of Change, the command trait that extends his binding range to 27 inches, which is useless a lot of the time. But, at the beginning of that round 2, his, Weird Knob Shaman was exactly 27 inches from my Lord of Change. And he tried to cast Foot of Gork, which is the one where the sky opens up and a big orc foot comes down and just starts stamping on people. And it does shitloads of damage. The way it works is it does d6 mortal wounds, then you roll a dice on a 4-up, it does d6 mortal wounds again, and then on a 4-up, it does d6 mortal wounds again, and just keeps going until it stops. Because he just keeps stamping. And I unbound it. And I unbound it with a roll of 11. Because that's greater than 10. The Lord of Change then knows that spell for the rest of the game.
Right.
So I was looking at that and I was like, sorry man, I have to do this. Cast Foot of Gork with the Lord of Change on his war boss. And it was both successful and fully killed his war boss from full health. But the worst thing about this is my mortal wound rolls were terrible.
Right.
So I was getting like, I did 2 mortal wounds and then it happened again, another 2 mortal wounds, and it has 7 health, and the final one was 5 mortal wounds. But it's this idea that the sky opens up and this huge Lord of Change foot just starts very slowly stomping this orc
giant foot's claw.
Exactly.
Bird claw.
And, so yeah, my Lord of Change, that was my Lord of Change's return to this game. It's like, welcome back, big bird. You just stomped a orc war boss to death with Foot of Gork.
Very good.
Which was very, very good. And that really, defanged the part of his army that could do anything on that part of the board. And then, to add insult to injury, the blue horrors opened up. Because they have the same range attack as pink horrors, it's just shorter range.
Yeah.
So basically, as long as you're within range, killing a full unit of pink horrors doubles its firepower.
That's true.
So they all did their ranged attack at the War Chanter and killed him from full health. Just like,
yeah, well.
So like, he'd really lost any ability to like really respond to them.
Yeah.
Without giving up the objective himself. And, I managed to like mortal wound off on enough of his, normal boys to basically shut him out of the game at that point. So that was starting with a win, which was nice.
Sweet.
Yeah, so that was good. What's your second game?
I played against Stormcast in the second game. It was the first mirror match I've ever played. And it was interesting to play against exactly the same units and know exactly what they all do. And his army, I think, was some Fulminators. He had a big unit of 10 Liberators, which is unusual, and a Relictor, a Castellant, and 5 Retributors that he put in space. And this scenario of the second round was the hero capture one.
Yeah.
So there are 2 points, and the thing is that you have to put a hero on them, and for every turn the hero is on that point, he gains the number of points that he's been on there. So if he's been on there for 3 turns, he gains 3 points that turn for that, and so on. So it's about planting heroes on objectives and trying to score them for as long as possible, trying to keep them alive, protect them, screen people off, that kind of stuff. It's an interesting scenario because it forces you to take heroes. Basically, if you're going to go into a tournament, you've got to have enough heroes to at least contest this. I had 2 heroes. One was the Celestant Prime, who ordinarily is in space for most of the game, and the other one was the Castellant. And on his part, he just had the Relictor and the Castellant. It was a really close game, and I'm very glad we got to play the full 5 turns of it, because he basically puts the Liberators and his 2 heroes on one side of the board. And at that point I knew, okay, so you know exactly what he's going to do. He's going to come up with the Liberators and screen off the 2 heroes as they just sit on this point for as many turns as they possibly can. So I deployed the Formulators opposite on that flank. I went around the back of a huge kind of, the scenery pieces at this tournament were enormous, massive line of sight blocking kind of mountainous things. Went around the side of this, followed by the Castellant, and by turn 3, I'd managed to get, with some clever maneuvering just around the 3-inch bubble of the Liberators, managed to get 3 inches away from both the Relictor and the Castellant, with my Castellant in tow, casting the Lantern on them. And his Formulators had charged across the center of the board and killed all of my archers. But I was fine with that because, the Formulators weren't going into my heroes, and the main thing you want to do is just kill the enemy heroes, totally. Basically. And then there was a huge moment, turn 3, I brought down the Prime on, the left side of the board, near the Formulators. There's nothing else on that side of the board. So if my Prime had kind of like managed to sit there, that was game 1, but he had to kill the Formulators because the Formulators were going to charge in and take him out. So he came down 9 inches away from the Formulators. I had my 3 inches, charge for my Formulators on his 2 heroes on the other side of the board. So I rolled my dice to the Prime, and I rolled a 1 and a 2.
Oh my god.
And, the Prime has a special ability that lets you change 1 dice in each round. So basically, you can guarantee a charge if you roll at least 1 3. Because the other one, you just turn into a 6 and you get your 9 inches. So I rolled a 1 and a 2, he failed his charge, and I was like, oh, not again. I'm so used to it happening with the Prime. It happens all the time. And then when it goes to the Formulators, Snake Eyes on the charge over there, I was like, oh my god, it's over. I was like, this attempt to win this game is absolutely doomed. There's no way this is going to happen at all. But Age of Sigmar, play it to turn 5. Always play it to turn 5. You don't know. And, always play it to the end because you're always in with a chance with most of the scenarios. So I, managed to survive kind of counter charges on the one flank with my Formulators. And on the other side, the Formulators charged my Prime and killed him instantly. The Formulators that he wanted to go in and kill just went and ate him. That was it. But my Formulators on the other side were just amazing. Like, they managed to pile in eventually to the heroes, and they just obliterated them. They just really, really destroyed them. And my Castellant got on the point, and the Formulators then destroyed all of the Liberators. They just stood there, completely tanking everything, healing back up, and just killed everything. And he then eventually brought down his 5 Retributors and was bringing his Formulators back in turn 4. And I basically had my Castellant sat on the point, and he'd been sat on the point for like 2 turns now. And they formed a kind of, just a barrier around him. They went sideways and just formed a kind of screen around him, against the other 2 units. And so they would have to charge the Formulators, wouldn't be able to pile into the Castellant. And I won the game in turn 5. Simply because he couldn't get to my guy.
Awesome.
So you go from that point of just failing everything in turn 3, and you think everything's just not going to go your way, and it's not rescuable, but just keep playing the best you can until the end, and you might get it. It was a bloody match, and it was really close, and I just managed to scrape it.
I think my second game, like, I definitely made some mistakes in it, but I also had a bit of a calamitous dice catastrophe, which I can agree, you can have cold turns. You can't have cold turns every turn.
No.
Like, you need that moment where things come back.
You do.
So my second game was against the Idoneth, who you played against in the first one. And I sort of identified the weakness of that was that, you need heroes to control objectives. A, I've got more heroes. B, one of his heroes is Latan, who is the octopus man.
Yep.
Pretty weak. The other is the Eidolon, which is scary, but it's only 1 unit. So my plan, but because he had these big blocks of infantry, my plan was to send the Gaunt Summoner up on the Balewind, at least for the first part of the battle, to just start wrecking those units, because their whole, you can't target me for shooting thing doesn't apply to magic. All of their saves against shooting attacks doesn't apply to mortal wounds. My hope was that with, the Gaunt Summoner's anti-horde ability, I can do a lot of damage to swordsmen pretty quickly. And he gave me the first turn, which I thought was a pretty big risk, because I can potentially battle shock off one of those units or devastate its potential. However, despite having +3 to cast and rerolling ones, I managed to fail to cast everything. So I did 1 mortal wound to Latan with an Arcane Bolt in that first turn of magic.
Yep.
I sort of split my forces to try and crowd him out of one of the objectives and, be positioned to kind of take the other one with my Lord of Change, depending on which way he chose to go. He he chose to kind of split his forces so that he had the Eidolon and the Swords Masters go for one objective, and all of the Namati Reavers and Latan go for the other one. And then, got a double turn. So then the double turn, the second turn for the Idoneth is run and charge. So that kind of carried him all the way into my territory at that point, because he could run in the first turn and then run and charge in the second turn. Yeah. So I was already kind of crowded out of actually getting anywhere. Because my hope was to actually absorb a charge, mortal wounds as much as I can, and then take the objectives. I didn't want to overextend too much because I didn't want to get carved up by the Reavers while they're still at full strength. Yeah. So this is still sort of part of the plan. Sort of. But it just didn't quite work. Like, it's not, like, I do believe genuinely that dice even out over the course of a game, but it matters when things do happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So, like, I was really, like, he had a lot of his, he'd set up, shipwrecks kind of protecting the objectives for himself, because he gets a 6-up ignore near them, and that was coming off just enough to keep one unit alive, etc. Yeah. Which is very hard to deal with. There was a thing that, so this is absolutely not on this player specifically, but it's a really important detail in the rules. We mentioned earlier when we were talking about how these terrain features are going to factor into the game that we weren't considering, and has a huge bearing on how they're used, and I think is a factor in their balance. Yeah. Which is, an Etheric Vortex of any kind needs to be placed so that it's more than an inch from any terrain feature. Which means you can't completely block off a passageway with it, which was happening in this game. Like it was impossible to get through a particular place without going past the vortex or something. Yeah. Like an inch doesn't sound like a lot, but an inch from any on a busy board is actually it does limit where they can go. Yeah. And it also limits how big they can be, you know, whether you want the big ones, because there might not be a space for them at all, particularly on a 4 foot by 4 foot board. Ignoring that rule meant that there were situations where, like, I was completely bottlenecked, where, thinking about it in hindsight, those objectives couldn't have gone. Following the rules. That's like, again, that's the sort of thing where it's a little detail in the wording that I don't believe that was a bad faith interpretation by that player. No. I think it was a genuine oversight. I think it's like, it fits, so I'm going to put it here. But you have to pay attention to that part of the rules. So that's just one thing that kind of occurred to me that game.
Yeah, I don't think you should be able to block off routes like that with terrain pieces.
No, but you can't. Within the rules, you can't.
But I mean, you can block off, like, any cavalry units with that, because, for example, formulators are more than an inch wide. Like, so you...
Although maybe for movement that wouldn't, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you'd interpret that.
I'm not quite sure how you'd interpret that.
But I think that's a nightmare recipe. If people are able to place terrain in a way, because the thing with woods, with Sylvaneth, is that anyone can move through woods, right?
Yeah, I think in order for there to be only an inch gap, you need to be in a weird situation where both sides are exactly an inch from another piece of terrain, which would require very specific positioning of those other pieces of terrain, which isn't that likely. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. Like, some of these gaps that were being plugged with the ghost ships, you just wouldn't be able to get it in there, because there's always going to be a position where it's less than an inch from another piece of terrain.
I see what you mean.
Like, cause like there were lots of like little picket fences on that board, and one of them was basically in the shipwreck, and it fit physically, but that's, again, like, not the rules. But yeah, so it was interesting. So I was in a bit of disaster recovery mode from that, both, very, very weak opening turn and then double turn. And then the, beginning of my second turn, I still had most of my big guns online. It really was time to, like, start taking some names. But unfortunately, like, I had one of the weakest turns I've ever, like, my opponent was, like, in that full kind of commiseration mode. I managed to get off, 2d6, 2 separate d6 mortal wound spells on the Eidolon, which has 12 wounds. In a very lucky game, that's a dead Eidolon. In a average game, that's a seriously needs to consider where it's standing Eidolon. Yeah. I did 1 mortal wound with each of them, which it then healed. I managed to fail to hit with 10 4-up shooting attacks from Pink Horrors. Lord of Change Charge whiffed every single attack and then received 6 wounds in return from Namati Reavers. 34 shooting attacks from Brimstone Horrors into 1 swordsman. Failed to kill him.
Damn.
It was just like a kind of cascading, like, I mean, admittedly, like, that's 34 5-up attacks. but I needed to get one wound through.
The Swordmaster, and they're the ones which resist shooting.
Yeah, so it's not totally unheard of, but it's not a great moment. It's not a great feeling.
It's a bad feeling moment, yeah, for sure.
Like, I sort of gambled on that a little bit. And then this is my mistakes, and I think it's more important to dwell on my mistakes than the bad dice, but like, it was so difficult to get to that objective when the Eidolon was sitting on it. And I needed to kind of like charge him with the Ogroid or something. Yeah. And that wasn't going to be possible because I couldn't get rid of this Swordmaster in order to be able to get out of that combat.
Yeah.
So it was a very sort of like grindy kind of, not frustrating game necessarily because it was really fun to see what the Idoneth can do.
Hard fought.
It was very hard fought. And then I just couldn't get I needed, like, in order to come back, I needed a double turn. Or I needed I needed a good round of damage, like something like that sort of punches a hole in the defenses. Like what you're saying with having that feeling halfway through the game, because I agree with you, it's not over till it's over.
Yeah.
And you can come back with a great moment, and it happens both ways in games. And that's one thing that's exciting about AOS. But it has to happen eventually. And when it just doesn't, there's not, because I went into that game thinking there's actually a pretty good matchup for me.
Yeah.
Like, nothing you're doing against me magically. Lord of Change will shut that down.
Yeah, for sure.
And he has these horde units that the Gaunt Summoner is going to pose a huge existential threat to. But if in order for that to happen, I need to cast the spell. And I can't do more than give him +3 to casting and rerolls. So if he's still failing, it's like,
yeah. I mean, I'd if the dice are going right, I'd expect you to blow up most of his army because they don't really have mortal wound defense and they're actually very fragile. So it's a bad matchup for him. But, yeah, you're right. If you just roll like that, there's something you can do about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that you can't position it any better to do anything because it's just dice, isn't it?
To some extent, yeah. Like, there are definitely things I could have done. I could have, so there's a point where if I had retreated from combat with the Ogre Thaumaturge, I didn't because he was the only thing getting wounds through on those swordsmen. He had a good game, but it was, at a cost. If I'd retreated with him at a certain point and sprinted to the objectives that the Eidolon of Mathan was on, and then not died to the Eidolon of Mathan, because crucially I wasn't charging the Eidolon, I wasn't going to do any damage to him. If I'd then survived his turn, I could have neutralized that objective and scored a point, which would have resulted in a draw overall.
Right.
But I think based on my dice, that's the best result I could have hoped for, short of my dice suddenly waking up and giving me those mortal wounds I needed to kill the Eidolon. There's nothing a lot I can do.
Yeah.
So then we went into, our round 3. What was your round 3 like, Tom, out of interest?
Oh, it was interesting, but strangely familiar, just like a waking dream.
So what was it? Who did you play against? What was it?
So there's always this moment where they come out, it's Swiss, so it's basically your performance is kind of measured between rounds and then they match you up with people who have had similar numbers of wins and losses, similar kill counts, that kind of thing. So they come out, they read, Jim reads from the sheet, and, there's the point where they go, Tom Senior, and I put my hand up, and then
you look around for your opponent,
and then they go, Chris, and then I'm like, wait a minute.
And we're standing next to each other.
And we just burst out laughing, basically.
Yep.
And no one knows why.
So round 3 is the battle report you were missing, everybody. It's and it is the two armies meeting again. Siege Demons versus
a true clash, but this time the stakes of a tournament.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And we were back on the first board that I played on, the one with the big mountain in the middle.
Yeah, which is a cool board. I really liked it.
Yeah, I really liked it as well.
Made for an interesting game.
Playing, what scenario is this? It's Total Conquest. The one with the extremely confusing deployment pattern.
Yeah, they need to fix that. That's so awkward to set up, especially if you're trying to translate it onto a 4x4 board from...
Yeah, it was just like, we basically just put dice at random points on the board, thinking we knew what we were doing and then gave up.
That was like, so you get 90 minutes per game, and the first sort of 15 minutes are us just like trying to figure out what the hell to deploy with this. But the basic rules of it are, there are... how many points are there? 4.
There's 4 points, 2 in each player's territory.
Yes. And basically, it's just, you have to stand on them to keep them.
No, this is the one where you can tag them and hold them.
That's right.
You get a point every turn that you have them.
Yeah.
And you get extra points for taking them off your opponent.
Yeah. It's a good scenario. It's one of my favourite scenarios of the General's Handbook 2017, actually.
Apart from the deployment pattern.
Apart from the deployment pattern, which is a nightmare.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
that actual kind of, the fights that creates with 4 points.
Like imagine
really
a staircase from hell that's different on a different side. It's horrible. It's like MC Esch's deployment zone.
Yeah, the deployment zone's horrendous. But it's good to have 4 points. I do like letting you just capture it and then move away and it still be captured. I think that's great because what you see in other scenarios, including the next scenario that got played in this tournament, is that it forces units to just sit there still doing nothing, for the entire game just to keep on taking up the points, which is, it's not great.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, our two armies faced off, and once we'd eventually gotten our shit together and deployed, we were in for an interesting game, actually.
So I set up, I know what your deal is.
Yeah.
And I know what you'll prioritize of mine, I think. So, I was a little bit unsure about the setup, but set up one unit to pick horrors off to the side, ready to run forward and grab one of my objectives that was on my kind of narrow deployment edge.
Yes.
Set my brimstone horrors up in a curve, basically describing the staircase of deployment zone as far forward as they could get. Another group of pink horrors and Lord of Change kind of nestled in the crook of that, with the Ogre Thaumaturge on one side and the Gaunt Summoner on the other, kind of ready to split around that mountain whichever way you went, because I knew I wanted to mortal wounds off the Castellan as fast as possible.
Yes.
I knew I wanted to use the line of sight blocking terrain to avoid fire from both units adjudicators. Taking fire on, particularly on the Lord of Change, taking fire on, or at least to force them to target different units.
Yeah.
I didn't want you wiping things out. I wanted you splitting the
damage.
fire. Yeah, spreading the damage out. I think, so I could absorb a little bit more rather than just having the Lord of Change nuked, for example.
Yeah.
What about your deployment? What do you have in mind?
So I was going to use, knowing that you've got these, very, very good mortal wound spells and wanted to keep the Formulates out of it, I deployed very centrally. My plan was simply to go up and hide behind a big rock and sort of see what happened. Which was pretty legit, to be honest. It turned out to be a good decision. The archers I placed like one side and the other because you have to cap the points before you own them. So you do actually kind of, and the great weakness of my army is that you just have so few models that you've got to put units in certain places to get stuff. And I would redesign my army completely if I was going to do this tournament again, I think, just based on needing extra bodies. But yeah, so basically I had one unit adjudicator on either side of this giant rock. So I'd have some shooting on whatever went either way, basically, but it was mostly for objective capture. And the prime was obviously in space.
Yeah, so you took the first turn, which I wasn't expecting.
Did take the first turn, because I wanted to be fancy and do something interesting with the prime. Because I'm still really new to using the prime. And he's never been amazing for me, but he does take quite a lot of skill and he's quite situational. But this time I decided to bring him down on the first turn in Chris's back line and try and assassinate something. Yeah,
there was a point in my back line behind the Lord of Change, behind the Gaunt Summoner, where you could fit him, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And it was equidistant between the Lord of Change and the Gaunt Summoner. And, basically thought I could go in, and once he comes down, he drops his, you could drop a comet somewhere. So he picks a point on the battlefield, rolls d6. D6 defines the radius of the attack. Anything caught within that takes d3 mortal wounds. It's extremely powerful. Has a very long range as well. It's one of the Stormcast's best possible shooting attacks. So there's a way of playing the prime where you bring him down early behind a wall and he just, serves as an artillery piece doing guaranteed mortal wounds every turn, and you basically get off all the enemy heroes by turn 3. It can be potentially really devastating, but I used him more stupidly than that. Because I could have brought him down behind that giant rock and just used him to nuke off your Gaunt Summoner in 2 turns. But instead I decided to bring him down in the back and try and charge the Gaunt Summoner and get him off.
The mortal wounds did do reasonably well. You took 3 wounds off the Lord of Change, which is actually, that's the maximum he can take without going down his damage track.
Right. So, I was silly to split fire, but if my objective was to kill the Gaunt Summoner, I should have just nuked the Gaunt Summoner. And, then there would be the potential of doing 3 mortal wounds to him, charging. He's got 2 attacks, but they're Bren 3 damage 3, so there's actually reasonable chance you kill the Gaunt Summoner straight away. But I was too greedy. I wanted to do damage to as many things as possible, which is which is a mistake. You want to focus damage on the thing you want to kill. That's always the wargaming thing, especially in AOS. So you want to make sure if you've got an objective, go for that. Don't get distracted, and I did, which is a mistake. But even then, the prime did make his charge, but then whiffed his attacks.
That was incredible. You rolled like a 1 and a 2.
Yeah, he just completely missed. He didn't do anything. He could have, if both the attacks had gone through, he would have killed the Gaunt Summoner straight away. He would have gotten him off. But even then, I mean,
Exactly. I know what you mean, but when you refer to getting another model off, it's not where my mind goes.
Wiped him off. Wiped him off the board. I'm sure he would not have enjoyed it.
I did try and kill the Prime with the Gaunt Summoner's melee attack.
That's true.
Because he's fine. Because technically that can work. Because the Gaunt Summoner only does 1 damage, but when he wounds with his melee attack, you roll 2 dice, and if you can beat the bravery score, you remove a model from the unit.
Right.
So it's have to beat bravery 10 or whatever on the Prime.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a Hail Mary, but it'd be very funny if it happened.
Yeah,
like,
that
the Prime
would be
whiffs
very funny.
completely, and the Gaunt Summoner just goes like, and it turns into tentacles. That didn't happen. However, because that was your first turn, then my turn too. This, I've previously, ever since I painted the Lord of Change, I felt like I've not always had the games where it feels like a Lord of Change, like a greater demon that's really quite scary.
Yeah.
But this was one of those moments because Lord of Change in the magic phase just ripped the Prime to pieces, basically.
Yeah, fucking obliterated him.
Opened up the big gateway to space underneath him is the way I see him, and then just set him on fire till he went through it, basically.
Yeah, you just killed him with all his spells. And, the thing with Prime in the backfield is that, you'd had to do something to him, and I was hoping you'd have to distort your line or stay back or something, or at least alter the shape of your army to deal with the fact that he was there, because you can't ignore him. He's going to go around beating a lot of stuff up. But yeah, he's got mortal wounded off by some good spells.
Just by the Lord of Change, basically, by himself.
But yeah, just by himself.
But like the Lord of Change, I think on average does about between 5 to 10 mortal wounds in the casting phase. As you probably expect him to do, is what he does.
Yeah, sure. And also, I just never expect the Prime to survive. Like, there's so much stuff in the game that just kills him outright, pretty much, once he comes down.
Yeah.
So he's got 8 wounds and a 3+ save. He's very vulnerable in the game for the points. He's 340, 360 points, something like that. Like, he's quite expensive for what he is. He can be a beat stick, like if he's used, as he was in my 4th game, in fact. But, that was not the way to use him in this game. But I've learned that now. I've learned to think about the Prime.
But that opened up the board a lot to me, because I no longer to worry. Like, I was like screening and say, he's not only, you come down, he's now gone. So, it allowed me to move forward. So my plan at this point was like, with everything having been tagged, was to rush the Gaunt Summoner, so it's interesting you went for the Gaunt Summoner, because I actually don't rate him against Stormcast very much at all. Like, he's the least effective hero, because he doesn't do a lot of mortal wounds. My plan was actually to I always think of him as being on top of the Balewind, kind of like this sort of mad magic genie kind of summoning fire across the battlefield. As soon as he starts running, it's very funny. Like, he's this little weird spindly old man with a weird hat that's also his head, just jogging.
Yeah.
So my plan at that point was to send the Brimstones, and the Gaunt Summoner basically sprinting across the battlefield, on one side, flap the Lord of Change to the other side to join the Pink Horrors, and surge up that side with the Pink Horrors, with the Ogroid kind of hiding behind the mountain, basically ready to split one way or the other. But actually, because my shooting and spell range is so short, that was a very quick turn for me, really. It was just like set the Prime on fire and then move up a bit. Yeah.
And then you got the double turn.
I did get the double turn, which allowed me to move up a little bit further. I was actually struggling with, because I tried to kind of move my Lord Change to the other side of the board. The weakness of the double turn is, obviously the upside is if I'm in range to do stuff, I do loads of stuff.
Yeah.
The downside is if as in this situation, you hadn't fully committed which way your fulminators were going to go. It looked like they were going one way, but there was nothing stopping you going the other way. You hadn't overcommitted yet.
Yeah.
It meant that I had to kind of overcommit to a side, if that makes sense. So I sort of felt a little bit exposed, in some ways. I did manage to, the Pink Horrors with Bolt of Zinch did manage to get the, and some shooting managed to get the Castellan to 1 wound remaining.
Yep.
Didn't kill anything else, I think, at all in that turn. Just kept running, basically.
Yeah.
But however, that meant that by the time you got to your second turn, my Brimstone Horrors were getting like pretty close to Adjudicators at that point. They'd run twice, basically, and were like making the way up. Their shooting attack was actually pretty formidable as well, I think.
Yeah, it's very good. It's just weight of dice is very good.
It's weight of dice, but it's like, I managed to kill 2 Adjudicators with it, I think.
Yeah.
So I was sort of like, at that point, Lord of Change, the Pink Horrors, the big scary stuff is on one side, but actually the Brimstones and a weird old man were coming up the other side in threatening one of your actual objectives.
Yeah. So the way the deployment is kind of lopsided. So one half of your force is often deployed further forward than the other half of the force. This is kind of interesting to me because I was playing a game of chicken with the Fulminators, and I'd intended to do this for the entire game and see which side your force is going to go to. And I've got a fairly good sense of what my Fulminators can accomplish against most things. And if I'm facing an army for the first time, I tend to just charge the Fulminators in because I can gauge the army based on what can and can't damage the formulators. That kind of gives you a good overview of what different units can do. So Namati can hurt formulators, for example, but Swordmasters of Hoeth can't.
Yeah, right.
You know, so you get a sense what dies quickly and what doesn't. So I was actually just holding off with them, and because I'd lost the Prime, they were the only punch left, and that's the only way I was going to do anything to the game was with them. So the Judicators were there to be bodies on points, but I did try and scoot the Judicators to the right, across. So these are the Judicators that were opposite your Lord of Change, opposite your Pink Horrors.
Yeah.
Because they're actually very far back. Like, you had a long way to actually travel with those guys to get to my point, because the initial deployment was so far back. Even though you'd had a couple of turns of like moving and running, a lot of that was spent on redeploying, of moving the Lord of Change across before you started pushing up.
Yeah.
So I had time on that flank. Like, I could go and try and weigh in on the other flank, but you'd kind of angled your Ogroid Thaumaturge onto that other flank. There's a kind of like,
He was ready to respond either way, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, I could see where he was going to go. He probably wasn't going to go around that side. And so I think like, it was like turn 3, I think, when I eventually made the choice to send the formulators left, send them into your Ogroid and your Horrors.
You sent them into the Horrors because I think you wanted to stop me getting that point, right? And
Yeah,
you did
so
successfully wipe out the Horrors.
it was about bodies. So it was about like, if the Horrors get onto that point, like, they're going to score it guaranteed. If I wipe out the Horrors, then there are only actually 2 bodies on that entire flank. And
it's suddenly, Gaunt Summoner.
Yeah, there's the Gaunt Summoner and it's a Minotaur.
Yeah.
So they went in, and with some shooting as well, they managed to wipe out all of the Horrors. And then we were in kind of an interesting position where it would take you a few turns to sprint up on the other side and actually take the point. But my formulators can be very fast, and they could actually go and get your points in the backfield.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're in a position where if I actually managed to push through and break through, I could actually maybe force a draw. If I shot off your Gaunt Summoner, I could potentially draw the game, basically.
Yeah. Enter an extremely good Minotaur.
Yes, you did very well.
So the Ogroid Thaumaturge emerged from behind a hill, which he'll do in my 4th game as well. Killed the Lord Castellan. Then mortal wounded a Fulminator to death in the magic phase.
Yeah.
And then killed the other one in the combat phase.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good going for a 160 point hero.
Good going, and not necessarily odds on, I'd say.
No, I don't think so. I think he got a bit spicy.
He was spicy, but he can do that. That's what's so good about him. That's the thing. He's got that mortal wound output as well on the charge and stuff like that, which is nice.
He didn't get to charge though. He got to pile in.
But his spell, that's really good.
Yeah, his spell, like that came off. I think, cause you had taken some wounds. I think like if you'd broken through the line, I would have moved the Lord of Change back to deal with him a little bit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a total like,
it wasn't a lot by any means, but there was a chance. There's always a chance.
But this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the moment where like, you did have a shot at kind of pulling things back, and then the Ogroid Thaumaturge was just a big no button, basically.
Yeah.
Cause he is very fighty. The really crucial thing was, the reason he could do that was because partly, solid dice.
Yep.
But it was also the fact that the Castellan was dead. So they didn't have those defense of the Lantern or anything like that.
Yeah, didn't have the like 2+ save, like randomly regenerating.
Yeah, because he has rend on most of his attacks. You had 4+ saves.
Yeah.
A lot of his attacks do like 3 damage, which is like a really healthy amount to be doing to Fulminators.
Yeah, definitely.
He's very good. He's just like, he's very good. It's just that defensive buff is the thing that slows that damage down so much.
Yeah.
And like,
yeah.
He can't really take it in return because he's only got a 5-up save himself. So
yeah.
So that was really, and then there was a sort of moment right towards the end where we weren't sure like if, I could quite make it onto the objectives, but I could, because by this point the Lord of Change was capable to kind of like completely open the can of mortal wounds onto the Judicators.
Yes.
On that flank, and sort of wipe them out completely and get ready to move up and cap that objective. All I had left to cap your other objective was the Gaunt Summoner who had run to hide behind a rock.
Yes.
And the Ogroid Thaumaturge. And by this point, the Gaunt Summoner was on 1 health left, so very easily shootable off. So I made a bit of a risky decision to use Treacherous Bond to link him to the Ogroid Thaumaturge, who only had 2 wounds left.
Yes.
Basically sacrificing the Ogroid, who was the hero of this game for me, really.
Very well, yeah.
To keep the Gaunt Summoner alive long enough to run him onto your objective. However, well, I'll probably let you tell it, but this was the most spectacular trick shot in history.
Yeah, so I only had a few Judicators left, but importantly...
You only had 1 left.
Importantly, was Prime.
Yeah.
And he shuffled across to just barely get line of sight on the Gaunt Summoner. And, he let...
It was like a hat sticking up above a rock, basically.
So he needed a headshot, basically. He just needed like a magical headshot with his magical arrow. And the Adjudicator Prime, he has a special arrow where he's on 2+ to hit 'cause he's special. And, when he hits with his, arrow, you roll a d6 and that's the number of wound rolls that he gets. And it's 3+ on those. And I think he rolled like 5 wound rolls in the end. And, so, they all got through because the Gaunt Summoner doesn't really have a save. And,
he doesn't because it's Rend 1, right?
Yeah, it's Rend 1, so he doesn't have a save.
So
the only save he has, of course, is his, 2+ shift wounds off onto
the Ogroid.
The Ogroid.
But the Ogroid didn't have enough wounds to have them all
2
shifted
wounds
off.
left. Yeah.
So that one shot killed both the Ogroid. Well, it killed the Gaunt Summoner and then killed the Ogroid behind a nearby hill.
Yes.
Because of what bit of treacherous magic gone wrong.
Yeah.
Which single-handedly earned you 280 kill points in the final.
Which helps, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did come close to destroying that flank. I did come really close to destroying the flank. And I imagine if I had 360 points worth of prime to bring down in the third turn instead of just like throwing him away in the first, it might have been quite a different game.
It could have been, yeah. It was really interesting.
But it was still really close. It was still a really good game, actually.
Yeah, it was. And the scoreline didn't really betray how close it felt, actually. Like, and that's the theme. That's going to go into my 4th game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I killed your entire army by the end of it, which is like 1,000 point.
If I lost, I wiped, basically. That's what happened with my army. Cause if something had gone chronically wrong, everything else was so exposed because I've got so few units. Everything else just gets eaten up.
But yeah, so that, well, I think Chimp said this at the time, but I won, Tom.
You did, yeah. When it mattered, pulled it down.
And this, so the way to think about this is that, like, this is the beginning of, this was the 2 armies encountering each other for the first time. Yeah. Possibly just deploying the Prime in a kind of, not this guy again, panic.
Yeah, it's almost like, target acquired, like, this thing's back, we need to destroy it as quickly as we possibly can, perhaps too quickly, perhaps overstretching.
Yeah.
So we were talking before the game actually started about kind of where we were and what was going on narratively with this. And it felt like it was, a Soulcast force going back into the same place where that your cult initially existed.
Yeah.
Hearing, rumours of chaos uprisings there, of, stories of old creatures returning like the Ogroid Thaumaturge, and then suddenly they see a Lord of Change and horrors just pouring out of the mists again, and they're like, he's back, everybody.
Yeah. Particularly because your general is the Castellan who used to rule this place.
Yes.
Like, and got gored to death by a former colleague, as happens sometimes.
Yeah, so the Prime, this is the old Chaos Lord, the Prime destroyed him with Galmaraz, and he was reforged as the Castellan, who is the new kind of go-to general in my army at the moment. And it's almost like Sigmar is sending that Castellan, as Sigmar does, back to his old homeland to actually deal with the chaos there.
Yeah.
So it's totally in keeping with what Sigmar would do.
And he's been, rebuffed for that now. And
yes.
it's a new
absolutely.
threat. So this for me feels like it's the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, right? Like this is this is the big setback that the good guys face at the start of the sequel. It would be boring if you had won. You know what I mean?
Right,
From the story point of view. It's like this guy, this Lord of Change is back. He's gone now.
If you replace the AT-ATs with just giant birds and, crazy magic shit, that's definitely it. It's like the rebel base being destroyed.
Yeah, and the Prime being taken out is a bit like, how like a lot of sequels or movie sequels and stuff start with like the great secret weapon that won them the day at the end of the first movie gets like destroyed in the first act of the second movie.
It's like, oh no, the stakes are higher now because of that. Yeah, for sure.
Like the Prime's been taken of action. It's almost like you need a big dragon or something.
It's almost like something, exactly. A whole new chamber needs to open up and come at this.
Yeah, but this is only the kind of the beginning, right? Like there are other weapons in the Zinch bank, including Skyfires. They're coming.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
So that was cool. So I was 2-1 up. How was your 4th game? We should probably, I guess, we both have really interesting 4th games, so I don't want to speed through them too much, but we should definitely.
Mine was pretty quick, actually. Like it was, I fought a vampire army, undead army, and it was led by, a vampire hero called Vordre, who is just one of the few named characters in the Legion of Nagash book. He's just like a random named vampire on Zombie Dragon, and he is absolutely great.
Why is he so terrifying? I heard his name a lot that day.
So he has a breath attack. His dragon has a breath attack that just does, hits on 3+ and just does 6 mortal wounds.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. So he goes and on a 3+, he kills a hero, and that's just outright. And that's even before you get into what his, damage is in combat.
Right.
So in combat, he doesn't have any attacks, he doesn't have many attacks that are below 2 damage, like he has a bunch of like 3 damage stuff. And he's just got an attack profile that lets him attack quite a lot of these, taking, I think, Legions of Blood, which is kind of like gives vampires extra stuff. He's also got, as the general, he can take an artifact, which is, colloquially called the sippy cup for some reason, but it's like a chalice of blood. And what you do is you drink, it's once per battle, you drink it and you get D6 wounds back. Right. And he's also really tough anyway. So he's got loads of wounds because obviously he's on a dragon. So he's just an absolutely, my army had nothing to deal with him at all. Like, by the time my prime was powered up enough to deal with him, he had already wiped out my entire army. And I'd gotten a charge on him with my Judicators. And the thing is, he's got like, Undead has Deathless minion saves on top of all their other saves, and he made a lot of those on a lot of my attacks, especially against the Fulminators, that meant like I couldn't really lay the damage on him. But in turn 3, like my entire army was dead by turn 3 simply because of Audrey. He just killed everything. He just killed everything.
How many points is he?
440, something like that.
Yeah.
450. And it's one of those cases where like AOS balance is different at 1,000 points.
Yes.
Like certain very big monster models, like Maw Crushers, unless you have certain tools to deal with them, basically just dominate. So that's not true for all armies. So some things will kill a Maw Crusher and then you're fine. But I had nothing that was capable of dealing with Vordrake all at once.
I think like I was initially a bit worried about taking a load of change at 1,000 points, getting there and seeing that like almost everybody had like a 300, 400 point big monster thing. It was like, oh, actually, this was the right decision rather than just get tabled.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the right thing to do. The problem with my army, the way it's built, is that I don't get to do all my big damage at the same time. So the Fulminator can go in and they will do their damage, and that's a lot, but the Prime isn't going to do that damage until turn 3, until he has 6 attacks, and then he starts to get the damage output. But I brought him down on turn 3, he charged Vordray and sorted him. I'd lost the game already, but I just wanted to see how much the Prime could kill. He went up the table and he, in one round of combat, he got a unit of Blood Knights down to 1, and Blood Knights are pretty good. So he, like, if you deploy him correctly, he can kill almost like loads of stuff. Like he can just go completely horribly, on tilt and destroy stuff. But you can't do it at the same time as you want the Fulminators to be doing stuff necessarily, because often the Fulminators are charged before that. So it's just the way that my army is structured has that weakness in it, that is unable to deal with like a big giant, very, very fast threat. That's the other thing, he was able to cross the board very quickly with a spell that gives him 5-inch movement. So he's moving, like 17 inches, then he's charging and stuff. So it's a brutal thing. You have to know, you have to build your armies to be able to soak that up, I think. I'd rethink the way I built my army after that game. Yeah. But it was pretty much a tabling after that point.
That was that's Scorched Earth, which is the one where you can hold objectives for points in your own territory and then burn them in the backfield.
Yeah, not a huge fan of that scenario.
I like it, but for me, so maybe to continue that point about what works and what doesn't in 1,000 points, Scorched Earth is one which I think requires a modification in 1,000 points.
Right.
I think and particularly on 4-foot by 4-foot boards, it uses 6 objectives, which are quite high value and end up very tightly packed in 4-foot by 4-foot.
Yeah.
In a way that ultimately it probably doesn't change the balance of the game, but it means that like certain armies are going to find that super rewarding and some armies are going to find it very, very difficult. And like, it just doesn't feel like quite the spirit of the scenario because it bunches everything up a lot. I feel like, 1,000 point AOS is almost a different game in some ways too. Yeah. It rewards a lot of the same skills and you can practice stuff, certainly. Yeah. But, I think both the game we played and the scenario, well, the game we played was good, but the scenario was a mess to try and adapt it to adapt the deployment pattern for a 4-foot by 4-foot board. Yes. The next one felt like the scenario just needed something to make it kind of like, we need like an official adjustment, like an official alternate, like, I'd love it if they just started printing battle plan deployment patterns for both for square and rectangular boards, like for any size, right? Yeah. Like, rectangle's the assumed default, but it's really not how a lot of people play the game. It'd be great to see that experimented with.
The trouble with the scenario, so basically, you have to stand on the points to keep them. And at 1,000 points, if you're Stormcast, you don't have many units. So, just because of the army I've taken and just the nature of it and the way it's pointed, I have to stand 5 units of Judicates on one, 5 units of 5 Judicates on the other, and a Castellan and Fulminator on the other. And as soon as I send my Fulminators off to do anything, I lose that point.
Yes, exactly.
So and that sucks. And the other thing about this scenario is that you can go, if you occupy an enemy point, a point of the enemy territory, you can destroy it at the end of your turn for D3 points. And certain armies can just do that in the first turn. If you lose the first turn to Ironjaws, then they get off all of their rolls, which happened to Chimp in this fourth game. They run up and they burn both points the first turn. And that's not a game.
Yeah.
The scenario is not.
I think it's been revised. I think it may have even been FAQ'd. But
I thought it had, but we were checking afterwards and we struggled to find it.
I think the answer to this, honestly, is for 1,000 points, Scorched Earth should have 4 objectives, not 6, because more armies are going to be able to do more to protect 2 objectives than to protect 3. That's the big issue, right? Because at 1,000 points, you have fewer units.
But then, Chimp and his opponent, they house ruled it to have 4 points, and the Ironjaws just ran up and killed his points.
But Chimp does have an unusually low model count.
I wouldn't say it's unusually low at 1,000 points for
like
AOS.
14 models.
But that's the same as I had in my army.
Right. I suppose I'm coming from perspective of, like, if I use blue horrors, like, I did have, like, 60 models, but, like, but I suppose you're gonna have so here's the thing. You're gonna have huge variance anyway at 1,000 points anywhere between, like, 80 and 10 models probably in a 1,000 point army.
Yeah.
But at 2,000 points, it's going to be equivalent variance, but a higher floor. And so you're still going to be able to, like, protect stuff. And also just the board's bigger, so getting to stuff. And it means less to lose 1, because then you're not necessarily going to immediately lose 1 next to it, and so on.
Potentially, though, it's still 4 foot from you to the opponent. Yeah, and that doesn't stop the Khorne, and it doesn't stop Ironjaws just being able to go up and burn the points, and that's
you're
it.
Probably right, actually. I'm just trying to find a universe where this works in any point value. Like, I like the idea in principle. But it just, for me, it doesn't feel quite right somehow.
No, I don't like it at all. I think it's fundamentally broken for certain armies and certain matchups. It doesn't result in good games at all. So any army that is fast and can get up in turn 1, that's already broken.
So the army I faced against was an interesting Wanderers army that I think Chimp just lost to in the previous game. Which was, big blocks of, like, wood elf archers, basically. Big blocks of units, who, their allegiance ability is, if they're within 6 inches of a board edge, they can, in the movement phase, leave that board edge and come back on anywhere on the same board edge. So they can just sort of, like, teleport up and down the side of a board. And their general was a nomad prince, and his ability is, or he had like a special command trait or something that means that he can take units from nearby, take them off a board edge, and then bring them back on any board edge.
Right.
Which sort of sufficiently manipulated creates this kind of bizarre French farce situation where wood elves run off one side of the board, then come on the other one, like in a game of Asteroids or something, and they go back off that side and come back in the back.
Yeah.
And so I knew that was a huge threat, basically straight away. Like, and these are blocks of 20 archers. Like, my entire army's fucked if they get into the back line.
Yeah.
So I deployed really carefully to screen, like, my entire side of the board. And it actually started pretty well. I opted for the Bellwind because big blocks of infantry, you say, and was effective at kind of very quickly eating through some of those big blocks of archers before they could really do anything.
Yeah.
Moved Ogroid forward so that, to kind of block off one side of the board was kind of blocked off in terms of him getting to my objectives by the Bellwind, positioning the Bellwind at the side of the board rather than in the center. It meant that it was a deliberate choice because it meant that I couldn't cover the entire board with my 3 foot by 3 foot bubble, but it meant that there was an obvious place where he had to go. So my idea was to, like, deny a big chunk of the board, send the Lord of Change up that way to start burning his objectives, and then, shut off and then slow him down as much as I could on the side where he would then funnel his troops. And it started, it was a really interesting game. And so I'm going to say this. So, the scoreline in terms of kills at the end of the game was 1,000 points to me. I killed every single one of his models. 120 points to him. He killed 1 unit of pink horrors. And I lost by 2 points.
Right.
On objectives. And that came down to, it was a weird one because I felt a bit rock and a hard place because if I start to move up the board with the Lord of Change too quickly, he just moves his archers in and the Lord of Change dies. Like I can't withstand shooting on that thing. But if I don't, because he had this ability to teleport to any board edge, as soon as I start to move forward and let him do that, I lose all my objectives, like straight away. So I had to play conservatively or defensively at the beginning and did loads of damage. Like started to pull things up. Like the Ogroid again was a huge hero. He basically charged up the side to prevent them from deploying too close to me. They then deployed as close as they could to the Ogroid, shot him with everything. He got down to 1 wound, but survived with the help of a destiny dice. Then on the next turn, he did a fire blast, killed the Nomad Prince, so they could no longer teleport to any board edge, which was huge, and then ran away and hid behind a barn. But because they were still on that board edge, that meant that they could teleport down to my edge of the board that way.
Yeah.
And he managed to get one unit into like, basically like a 4 by 5 inch pocket at the bottom of the board where there was just space for one unit. And then that unit, not only, then that unit then made a 9-inch charge onto my pink horrors that were guarding the objective and then wiped all the pink horrors out before I could use my Destiny Dice 1 to bring them back.
Yeah.
So my entire plan to like fully tar pit that corner failed, basically. What I should have done, again, to focus on mistakes rather than like that charge necessarily, was commit the brimstones earlier to that corner of the board when I knew he probably couldn't easily get to the middle. But the problem is I didn't do that. Lost the pink horrors. He immediately burned that objective, which got him 2 points. If he hadn't made that charge, I would have won the game. They just came down to that charge roll. Like, if he hadn't made that 9-inch charge, I would have held that objective for an extra turn, earned an extra point. I would have been able to move things into position to defend it. He probably would never have burned it. I lost by 2 points in the end, which is the 2 points he got for burning that objective. By the end of the game, I had burned all of his objectives and killed every single one of his units, but I just couldn't come back from...
It's the random D3 as well. Like, there's loads of stuff I don't like about this scenario. There's loads of stuff. You take all these risks to do that, to burn the enemy objectives, and you could just, you get 1, you get 3, it's just arbitrary.
It can almost work as a comeback mechanic. It's just, but it being random is really dodgy. Like, I could have also won the game if, cause I burned all 3 of his objectives and I got 1 point, 2 point, and 3 points. Right. And if I'd gotten 3 for all of them, I would have drew. And would I have earned that necessarily?
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
about play then, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It was a weird game. It was fun in some ways because it was like, it was a fun person to play against. It was an interesting army. But, like, it was, again, I think maybe this is a scenario, like, it was a weird rock and a hard place thing where his army moved in such a weird way. Yeah. Because the other super powerful thing about that ability is like, because they've just made all these changes in the 40k FAQ, which I guess is news that we didn't talk about, but, to rein in deep strikers. Yeah. So like in 40k now, deep strikers can only come down in their own territory on the first turn. And that's to just, let's get rid of this, I'm in your backfield straight away thing. Yeah. Let's make it less important to screen against deep striking every minute of every second. Because it is so powerful in any objective-based game. But if there is a downside to that, which you've experienced, like if there is a downside to that backfield early deep strike, is it can leave units in the wrong place. Yeah. You know, if units outpace you and run across the board, then your own territory can be being threatened and your deep strikers are huffing along to catch them. The thing that was so hard to deal with for me with that Wanderer ability is, yeah, they've come down here and hit my territory, but they're still on a board edge, and that board edge gets, particularly on a 4 foot by 4 foot board, gets them pretty much wherever they want to go in their own territory. Yeah. So like, they could teleport up and down the side of the board, you know, turn by turn, but nonetheless, like that's a huge territory. It's like, it's like movement becomes almost irrelevant when they're also archers with 20-inch range. So it's like, that sort of 1.5 foot of that board just becomes this kind of global kind of sort of zone, like they're on a rail that moves up and down the board. Yeah. So it's super hard to deal with. And again, an instance of where I think building an army for these kinds of events is a very effective thing. Like if you know you're on a 4 foot board, some abilities are just crazy good. Yep. Ogroid was, however, a giant hero again. Nice. Because he killed all of those guys on the bottom thing. Yep. Then he killed the Nomad Prince, and then he killed the Way Watcher in single combat. And then he was finally allowed to rest. And the Lord of Change, like, I had a really cool moment at the end when I knew I probably couldn't win because of that one moment. Basically, I just couldn't pull it back. Like, I needed lucky D3 rolls. But I just decided, like, well, fuck it. I've got 1 turn left. I am going to kill everything, and B, burn all your objectives. And the Lord of Change just went incredibly ham. Like, killed loads of archers in combat, then ran across the board, mauled loads of more of them off, and then just kept going and killed more of them. Burned every objective. So that was really cool. It was really like, I don't really begrudge that loss too much because it was down to something I really can't control, I think. But it was like one of those sort of like, kind of really close losses. But it was a really, really fun afternoon. And like, it was really cool to mostly, apart from playing you, well, I really like playing against you, but like to play against new armies.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It was a really good day. I enjoyed it. Made me feel as though the Stormcast need rejigging to work at 1,000 points, as in I would probably ally some stuff in to actually make them work. And 1,000 points is just a very different, you need kind of a certain number of bodies, I think. and certain armies can't produce that necessarily, the battle line of options they have and the type of army they are.
Yeah.
I think it's still going to be quite good. I definitely misplayed a few games, but I've really felt the lack of, like, I just needed a big unit of something just to sit on points and to
I find
occupy.
That the mistakes that were losing me games were things very much to do with the right times to press advantage and move on to objectives, and those are good lessons to learn, I think. Like, ultimately, like, yeah, like, that final game for me, yes, it was a 9-inch charge that just turned the entire game.
Yeah.
But I could have protected against that possibility better by recognizing what I had that was safe earlier.
Yeah.
If that made sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And obviously hindsight's 2020, but like, yeah, I even though variance can be a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, I do feel like there's enough meaningful stuff you can do to guard against it. Like, the most important thing is I came away thinking that even my losses were like, well, especially my losses were like experiences that I can apply.
Yeah, for sure.
Not just, you know, oh, that was lost from the beginning or whatever, which is a bit of a rubbish feeling.
Yeah, I think the only, so Chip had an amazing weekend, amazing day where he killed more than any other army on the day.
Yeah, he was first on kill points.
He was first on kill points.
I think, in the end, because I had 2,000
Yeah,
kills.
I think he tabled 3 armies of the 4.
Jesus.
He took, I think he took Vordre as well, and did very well with him. He's very good. He also had Arcan, which is one of the sort of princes of the undead. He's got a spell called Curse of Years, which has about a 15% chance to just wipe a unit, any unit. And you sort of roll a bunch of dice, and for any 6s, you roll them again. If you roll 5+, they get to keep rolling. And then any 4+, you keep rolling. 3+, you keep rolling. And at that point, the unit just dies and crumbles into dust. So he managed to Curse of Years, a unit of Gore Grunters, and a unit of Brutes, I think, across the day. But he also took, like, 10 direwolves for battle line, and he took an amazing old model called the Corpse Cart.
A wheelbarrow.
Which is just a wheelbarrow full of really gross undead dudes who are still alive and screaming in agony. And that inspires the direwolves to have a 4+ save, and does some other things as well. But yeah, Chip had a terrible game in the last game, largely because of scenario, because he was playing against Ironjaws, and Ironjaws just, if you get all of your Ironjaw kind of speed abilities off in the first turn, they run up, they burn everything. That's it, really. Like, just he scored loads of points on the D3s he rolled, and it was just almost no coming back from that. And it feels like no scenario should ever allow that to happen.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Having initially tried to play the kind of devil's advocate on this, I think it's too swingy.
It's like that one's bad, and the one that wasn't on the day, called Knife to the Heart, is bad as well, I think. That's the one where
the long board also doesn't work on a 4 foot by 4 foot board.
Again, yeah, that doesn't work either. And also, yeah, that's the one where basically there are 2 points, and if you go and catch the enemy point, you get those points, or you could just sit on your own point and just score for the rest of the game, and then the actual win comes down to kill points. But if the armies, depending on the armies on the board, if one person has a unit of 40 skeletons and loads of grave sites around, they just sit on their own point, and then your opponent looks at that and goes, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to kill that and get that point without sacrificing my own point. And so it ends up being a field battle. It ends up being people going into the middle and trying to kill as many points as they can, and AOS is not a good game when it's a field battle. Like, it's got to be about objectives, I think. I think having objective play basically corrects loads of the kind of unit versus unit balance point stuff that would otherwise occur.
Yeah.
Just because movement is actually part of how units are pointed and not just their killing output. So yeah, there are 2 bad scenarios that I'd like to see fixed for General's Handbook, and 1 deployment zone nonsense that I'd like to see fixed in the next General Handbook.
Yeah, indeed.
But hopefully we'll see that.
Yeah, cool.
It was a good day. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really did as well.
It was really good. And, yeah, it was nice. I'd certainly I think there's going to be another one in a few months, so I'll go on to that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really good time as well. Like, it was nice to, see lots of different armies and place exactly averagely.
Nice. I did pretty poorly, but, it was.
Are you in 9th?
I think so. Out of 12.
Yeah. I came 6th.
So
which
good.
is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Extremely medium.
Bang on medium. So, I will do better next time. I'll play better and bring a better army.
Let's do some questions from the internet.
Let's do it.
Or specifically, our inbox. First up, Chris, aka Ascanius on Discord, writes, Dear Crypt Infirsten and Tomb Banshino, which is pretty good.
Ooh, I like it.
That's pretty good.
That's some effort. What's that?
It occurred to me while reading some of the new battle tomes, namely Daughters of Cain and Legions of Nagash, that there are certainly a lot of long drawn-out conflicts sprinkled into the background of Age of Sigmar during the Age of Myth and the Age of Chaos, and it's possible Games Workshop deliberately set up these lengthy previous ages in the lore as to give themselves a deeper history to potentially exploit or explore in the future, the same way they're currently doing for the Horus Heresy. Am I reading too much into this world-building decision? What do you think? And then a bonus Primarch question, which we can get to first, I imagine. Canonically, Petarabo is the wargamer of the family, and Sanguinius is presumably the painter, but who writes the fan fiction? Thanks for podding, Chris. So for me, the answer to this is fairly clear. It's the Lion is the fan fiction writer, and you can tell because he's basically the self-insert anti-hero of the Primarch.
Oh,
set.
so he's the fanfic writer who puts themselves.
He's the moody,
and makes them really
he's the
cool.
moody Evanescence self-insert anti-good and baddie character. You know what I mean? The person who's cool enough to be a baddie, but has ultimately a heart of gold.
And everyone thinks they're the new cool now, but actually it's them. They put themselves in the story.
Yeah, deliberately
to.
That's why I think the Lion's the self.
I think that's a good sell.
Yes, like. I mean, Magnus writes a book, but it's not fan fiction. It's bizarre noodle.
Destroys your, it destroys your mind with it's like that, what was the book that was written from the perspective of a fetus, that was written by,
Tristan Shandy. Not
Tristram Shandy. Though it would be, maybe Magnus would write Tristram Shandy, actually. Yeah, it's kind of genre spanning. It's nonsensical, self-defeating. That's very Magnus, actually.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
That's his fan fiction.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
Tristram Shandy is just Magnus the Red fan fiction. You heard it here first.
There you go. Yeah, that is true.
How about,
Age of Myth. Yeah, I think you also need a lot of space between the old world and the current realm situation to make it seem as though that it could happen, maybe. I mean, to your question, definitely yes. They're always putting hooks in for stuff.
Yeah.
Like, one line about a Skaven submarine in a battle tome could one day be a range of models in a boxed game about underwater combat. I think Games Workshop habitually do this in their writing, where they just sort of like have little hooks, little spokes. I
think some of those hooks are for players as well, right? For
sure,
It could turn into a boxed game. It could also just turn into a rad conversion.
Yeah, definitely. And the Age of Myth is potentially like that. I mean, you can have you can invent heroes for the Age of Myth that have survived into the current realm situation.
I think it's more about giving themselves space. Like, I don't think specifically that it's going to be like a Horus Heresy style background event for Age of Sigmar, because Age of Sigmar, to be honest, feels like living through the
most important time of,
yeah. I think it's more likely that it means that the big crucial difference for Age of Sigmar compared to the old world is that sort of the space for everything to exist, both in terms of the size of the realms, but also the amount of time that has passed. Like, you can always find a space or a time to insert the kind of civilization you have in your mind or the crazy high fantasy idea you want to execute. Yeah. Which they can benefit from, obviously, in terms of new stuff in the future. They can justify basically anything they want to do with any faction at any time, basically, which is very freeing. But also I think it's there, I think it's predominantly there for players. I really think it's a response to how restrictive the old world was relative to this and relative to 40k as well. I think it's not a good, like, I don't think a very tightly mapped out fantasy world is a good fit for a miniatures game. I know I've said that before, but I don't think it is.
Yeah. I can't imagine them going and writing an Age of Myth, kind of series of books or anything like that, because you would want to develop the Age of Sigmar setting more than you'd ever want to develop
a lot of books have an Age of Myth portion. Yeah. Bear in mind, like a lot of Stormcast backstories are, this is who I was during the Age of Myth, and then I got zapped at the beginning of the Age of Chaos. So you've seen it in glimpses, but it's often there to just sort of furnish the origins of a character who is presently a big gold man.
Yes, that's true. It is, it's nice to do flashbacks to the time when the gods actually fought, which is also which is kind of like the Primarchs fighting in, Horus Heresy, I suppose, but it was when Sigmar actually went down and stood next to Nagash on a battlefield and fought the Chaos Gods, right? Like, it's that kind of stuff you'd never actually be able to make models of that you want to kind of evoke.
Yeah, I guess I want to read that book, actually.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool, actually. Maybe we talked ourselves out of this.
Yeah. Okay, well, the answer in short, yes. Next up, Mr. Juice writes, Dear Painting Mans, I've just this moment realized that every time I have to paint a visible eyeball on something, I end up painting it either red or green. I don't think there's a reason I default to those colors other than it being what I'm used to. So the big old eye I have to paint, the next big old eye I have to paint will have to escape this ocular comfort zone and do, I don't know, blue or something. My question is this. Are there any painting related comfort zones that you want to try and break out of? Break out of is an interesting way of putting it. Because, like you're saying earlier, there are certainly habits that can kick in, new techniques you can learn to get better at stuff. I don't know. I definitely have things that I typically do, but I don't know. It's always linked to what looks right on the model to my mind.
Yeah, I'm more about avoiding boredom than kind of breaking out of things I do. It's more like I'm bored of painting gold on Stormcast, so I've bought some Sylvaneth. So I feel like I can dive into my shame pile to do something a bit different. So after the Star Drake, I'll do a couple of small heroes, and after that, I'll probably do a unit. And so I think it's more about that than actually kind of getting out of. It's more about painting different scales of things for me than actually breaking out particular techniques, because all the models require lots of different techniques.
I'll tell you what, I do have an answer to this actually, and it's my basing. I think,
yes.
When I first started painting, I decided that I would deliberately do very simple bases. And then I've sort of slightly grown in complexity, but I've gotten sort of set on a particular color scheme and a particular kind of way of doing it. And I tend to not spend loads of time on bases because I much prefer just the painting of the models. I think the next army from scratch that I do will have a very different basing scheme. Right. I'm not too worried about clashing my own terrain board because...
No, it doesn't, having played on lots of terrain boards now.
Doesn't matter loads.
It's fine, isn't it? Yeah.
So the next time I do an army from scratch, for example, I think I will, and it might not be an AOS, I don't think I will, I think I'll spend a little bit more time on bases and I'll try something new. Yeah, because that has become a genuine comfort zone, which is it's Dark Reaper, dry brushed with Rust Grey, dab brushed with Screaming Skull, with a wash and some tufts. That's, I can move past that, I think.
I think you'd experiment with some cork, some fake water, all that kind of stuff.
I've been thinking about experimenting with cork, Tom.
Yeah, interesting. That's the new basing realm, isn't it?
Indeed. It's cork.
Cork. Lovely cork.
Next question comes from Ross, who writes, "Hello, hobby podders. I was interested in your discussion around your vintage collection / childhood shame piles. I've taken a third path between start fresh and update all your old models. I have a complementary away kit scheme that is deliberately simpler than I'm using on older models that would otherwise be so far down my backlog as to never get reworked. A quick visual example," he sent a photo. "My core scheme is very cartoony with bright whites and shell-shaded black edging. It's time-consuming, but gives a finish I adore," and he attaches a picture of some very nice Tau done sweet. As described.
Thank you very much.
So that's for Shadow War. Conversely, my 2003 Fire Warriors featured my teenage take on What If Stormtroopers, but also Tau. Hampered by my insistence on unthinned paints, they're a pretty embarrassing bunch I only keep around to play larger games with. The away kit pattern inverts my core scheme and skips highlighting to make something that looks similar without being an unfinished version of my other models. I'm finding it a pleasant break from my core work that still allows me to refine my techniques. By targeting previously unpainted models and reworking choice units helps me get towards a wholly painted force for playing a game with and expand on. So I guess I should have a question. Why not do different things with your older models, eh? Cheers, Revolver Rossalot. It's an interesting idea, Yeah. And we were talking earlier about doing slightly different things with your paint schemes just to have a bit of a break or kind of differentiate things. But I really like the idea of, I think when you understand your color scheme well enough, inverting colors and finding new, easier ways of using those colors is a good way of speeding up projects, actually. That's exactly what's happened with my Zangor.
Yeah, and I feel like you do need a bit of variety within a force as well, and inverting colors is a really good way of doing it. I have actually, one of my test models was doing a blue armored warrior with the gold shoulder pads and stuff, literally just inverting the Hammer Sigmar, and it was a disaster. Right. So you have to be smart about it. I think it's great for Tau, especially when you've got oversuits and undersuits, and this is true for Space Marines and stuff, where inverting those can just work really well and it give you loads of variety. I've tried to build it into my Stormcast army by just doing different units with different patternings and things like that, but it's not quite the same principle.
No, but nonetheless, I think it's, the core of this is if you're not excited about painting something, but you nonetheless want to play with it, then, do the sensible thing. Reduce your traditional paint scheme to its core elements and then just do that is probably the best.
Yeah.
Which is what has been done here, which is super cool.
Yeah, it looks really good. Really nice.
Chris writes, Dear Minis Monthly, I've been marathoning the podcast while bagging up my comic book collection and have enjoyed it immensely, particularly your digressions on sportsmanship and the onus of mutual fun times that Wargames place on all their players. My question goes slightly Magic the Gathering rules wang, but I'll try and keep it brief. In multiplayer Magic, a player that has resigned or been killed immediately ceases to exist. Really?
Wow. Brutal tournaments.
Yeah. All their stuff vanishes, and anything targeting or attacking them stops doing those things. Frequently, a player will cast a big spell or attack with a lot of men in order to go kill a player and reap some side benefit, usually gaining a lot of life. The doomed player can simply resign at this point to deny their opponent that benefit. One of the people I play with objects vociferously whenever someone does this, arguing that it constitutes poor sportsmanship. Are they right? If you have a teammate still in the game, I would argue that resigning at this point is a smart move. Even in a free-for-all, is the person with enough firepower to kill people entitled to even more stuff just because? Keep up the good podding, Chris. P.S. Why are Skaven so cute in my mind, but so gross in reality? Well, the reality's wrong. They are cute. They're just cute. They're weird and they're gross, but they are also cute.
Yep.
And they're cute not just because they're little micey rat people, but because they're so ambitious.
They
and
really
so doomed.
try hard, don't they? Yeah. Which is very, very nice.
It's not laudable necessarily because they are murderers.
That's true. Everyone's a murderer,
in some ways, aren't we all?
The Age of Sigmar. Aren't we all just murderers?
Interesting question.
So, to get this right, people resign to get out of giving away victory points in Magic?
No, I don't think it's quite that. I think it's more that, when the sort of, victory is a foregone conclusion, you can sort of resign immediately to deny the rest of the effect. I think, I guess maybe though in a team game, then that can actually prevent. Yeah, I think you're right. In a team game, it can prevent some of the benefit from triggering off a kill move. I admit, but I think the principle of it is resigning bad sportsmanship if resigning has a game effect. Like, does it count as an action, I guess, is the sort of...
So this sounds to me like it's having a gamey effect on the outcome of the win or whatever. Which, if it's... I mean, resigning is there to save time, isn't it? Ultimately. And I think if... obviously in tournament plays, evidently you're allowed to resign, so it's part of the game. But if it's not going to take that much longer to play through, then perhaps say no one can resign and make sure that everybody accounts for their points. So in Age of Sigmar, kill points are often used to resolve ties in standings. So even if one person has clearly lost, you play to the end or as far as you can to get as many kill points as you can, because that can have a deciding, factor. So it sounds like, if one player just went, I resign, I deny you those points, then that would seem not great.
Yes, you shouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, the answer to that is if you resign in a game of X-Wing, it counts as a total kill loss food.
You just lose all your ships.
Yeah, you lose all your ships.
That's the way to do it.
They're destroyed, basically. Yeah. So, your opponent immediately gets all the points.
That's a good way of doing it, I think. Yeah.
So you actually don't resign because you want to hold on to some points that might hold you.
Yes.
If you win your next game and you're both on the same kill record, it could actually end up getting you ahead in the long run. So, that's a sort of, I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum. I think in principle, resigning's a funny one. Like, I'd always rather play to time than resign, I think, because ultimately people are there to play a game, and bringing the game to an end, obviously in the exact instance we're talking about in the sort of last foregone conclusion, last seconds of a game and exactly when it takes place, which isn't quite the same thing.
No.
And I do understand conceding, but ultimately everyone's there to play.
I think so, but in casual play, if someone's obviously winning, you can concede to play again and re-rack or whatever.
Yes.
And then some games can be lost from a very early point, and to play for an hour is perhaps just asking too much of the losing player to actually endure for the sake of the other person's enjoyment as well.
I do think, yes, there are certainly examples where it's like, although you say that, but we also said earlier, Age of Sigmar, always play it to the end, things can surprise you. which is also true. But what I'm saying is it would be impossible to codify in a sort of when is it okay, when is it not okay sense, because you're going to feel it sometimes.
Yes,
you're going to have that feeling of like, it's round 1 and I've lost.
Yes.
And be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you're going to be right. And like, there's no going to be no general rule that covers every situation.
Yeah. Perhaps like in tournament play, people shouldn't be able to resign really. People aren't in AOS, like you're supposed to play to the end. Yeah.
There was, like, I can't remember exactly what happened now. There used to be an issue with, draws in X-Wing.
Right.
Where the issue was not resigning, it was the ability to draw a game, which led to a kind of a scandal when, a bunch of players all realized that if they all drew their games, they would all make the cut.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the top 8 all playing each other. Realized that if we all draw, we all go ahead. Yeah. And we shut out everybody else because the point differential means wins, losses, doesn't matter. Like, we will all end up ahead anyway. So they all just agreed ahead of time to draw all of their games. I'm pretty sure this is how this ended up working out. So they just, and that just means not playing the game, basically. Yeah. Because what they agree to is we'll each fly around in circles and not shoot each other for 75 minutes, or we just don't play. And sure enough, it worked, and they effectively gained that position for themselves and shut out every other player in the tournament. And this caused a big, eventually, Fantasy Flight just removed draws from the game as a concept, to prevent this from happening again. But it created this big debate because that option was available to them. That was a way of gaming the tournament.
Yes.
And also, like, quote unquote, sort of saved time. They didn't have to play. They went into the top 16 more rested and more able to participate than they had been if they just played a grueling 75-minute game. For that reason, I think it puts me in the mindset of anything that allows you to play less game doesn't always work to my favor. Like, I think the endurance aspect is a part of tournament play, and I think you should be playing all of your games until they end according to the rules, right? Like, sport isn't a good analogy, but to the extent that it works. It
does happen in sport.
Like, it does happen in some sports, but you still play matches through. It is still part of the discipline of sport. Right?
There's been very, very interesting occurrences in football where there's a reason why at the end of a kind of group stage, all the people in the group play at exactly the same time, minute for minute start time, minute for minute finish time. And that's because people used to get to a situation where if they knew the results of 2 other games, they would stop trying to win. Or they would play for a draw and they would just stop playing, and they would just literally, both teams would sit back, one team would just pass the ball from among themselves, and there are a massive paying crowd there watching them do this, just because for points wang reasons, it meant that they would get through and other people wouldn't get through.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons it's interesting, because it's not the same as a paying crowd, but in a tournament setting, everybody's paying to play, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So if someone wants to play, I think you kind of have to let them. I don't know. It's a tricky thing, right? Like, to me, it always comes down to, like, the resigning as an issue comes down to being a good loser. And I maintain that being a good loser is one of the most important, like, social skills that comes with going to tournaments as a wargamer of any kind. Like, if you're not fun to win against, then it creates a really toxic feeling. Like, you know, I've encountered, you know, I would say that 90% of the negative experiences I've had with other people at wargaming events have been people who don't take setbacks well, as opposed to people who gloat when they're winning or become unpleasant when they're ahead. Like, I've almost never seen that.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of, like, people, you know, kicking tables and pushing things over and throwing ships across the board in X-Wing and stuff in frustration.
Really?
Yeah. I've seen all of these things.
Goodness.
And that creates a negative feeling, because, like, we're trying to play a game. Like, and I guess I see resigning in some cases as being a bit like a rage quit kind of a thing. It's like, I'm just out. Whatever. You know? Like, I don't think I would ever concede, because it's like, not because you always have a chance at winning, but, like, let's play it through. Yeah. Let's see what happens. Like, if you don't enjoy the basic interactions of the game, the sort of rolling dice and seeing what happens and the moment to moment stuff, then I think maybe sometimes you lost sight of what the game's actually about. Like, let's see if the hero, like, maybe it mattered in a tournament sense that your Judicator could make the crazy trick shot where he kills both the Gaunt Summoner and the Awkward Thaumaturge.
Right.
It wasn't going to make a huge difference to that game.
No. But
it was still worth doing for the moment.
There's a point in that game where I could have so played for a draw.
You could have.
Which was an interesting moment, I thought, in terms of like how other players might play that.
Oh yeah, right at the end. Yeah,
so there's 11 minutes left, and if I'd just taken ages to take my turn, it would have been 2-2. Way, it's a draw. Which obviously isn't the way to play it. You got to play the game. But
no, I mean, I think a lot of tournaments would have a stipulation against slow play.
I'd hope so. Yeah.
But still, it could be hard to judge.
Yeah, for sure.
I think in our case, it wouldn't have been hard to judge.
No.
Because you had like one unit
right.
left, and you can't, what reasonable
measuring
defense
this
could
really
you mount,
detailed.
like, of why it's taking you 10 minutes to move
it's really important
three units.
Really important that I get that line of sight. Just gotta measure it. I gotta measure it again.
Yeah, exactly.
And so on.
I don't know, it's just like tabletop games against strangers is such a mesh of, complex kind of personality clashes, or they can be, that I think just working on your own, how do I become fun to play with and pleasant and, reasonable and open. Like, I'll put it this way, I think we both experienced this, and this is again not the fault of the player, those Idoneth Deepkin dice are incredibly hard to read.
Yeah, those are terrible.
This was a weird situation because they have the special edition Idoneth Deepkin dice, which like the Tzeentch dice and the Nurgle dice, really hard to read.
Yeah.
I think those dice are fun, and I use them for Destiny dice because they get rolled once, they get set to the side, you never have to read them quickly, ever.
No.
That's what they're for. I really strongly recommend against using those dice for regular play.
I agree.
Because you can't fucking read them, and your opponent definitely can't read them. And the Idoneth Deepkin dice are perfectly translucent, clear squares with extremely fine blue lines drawn on them.
Yes.
Like, I couldn't tell. And obviously, I trust my opponent, and I do trust my opponent, because there were times when he would roll 20 dice, and I would go, oh, that looks bad for me. And he would go, oh, that's terrible. And loads of the things I thought were 4s were 2s.
Yeah.
And I had no idea at all what was going on.
Same here, yeah.
But the issue with that is it creates a kind of weird atmosphere through the whole game because, I don't know anything about how my opponent's rolls are going. I'm just being told what the results are and assuming that it's true. The good thing about war games is that they create these moments of kind of absolute clarity where you can commiserate someone on their bad dice or go like, oof, that was good or whatever. But the dice, at least, the rules are a kind of shared reference point.
Yes.
Anything that obfuscates that, I find that super
it takes loads of the drama out of the game. Just, I mean, I take loads of dramatic interest in what my opponent is rolling for their hit rolls and for their save rolls, and I'm leaning over and I'm really interested in how this is going to go. And those are little moment spikes of drama, and those dice are awful. They're completely unreadable. I mean, also slows the game down because the player has to squint down at them and actually look really closely at what each one of them are. And yeah, definitely, I mean, they're terrible for quick play, for tournament play.
Yeah,
and
totally.
for any sort of social play, really.
I appreciate we've gotten off topic of resigning into just sort of how to
make better tournaments.
I think, I'm going to get some movement trays, for London GT, although I can't use them for everything because snaking horrors around to block stuff off
is a big thing, isn't it?
Is a big thing. But things like that, things like pre-measuring dice bags.
Yes.
I've got my dice in little drawstring bags, and I'm gonna make sure I know exactly how many are in each bag.
Oh, yeah.
So that when I need 40 dice, I know that this bag is 40 dice. I'm gonna separate some out and then double check. But
yeah,
the moment I always feel most self-conscious is when I'm counting out dice, because I want to be right. But there's a moment of it takes a little bit of time to count 37 dice out of a bag, right?
But I always find it's clear when you group them on the table, because your opponent can see, oh, that's 5, that's 5, that's 5, that's 5.
Yeah, you do that, but still, that's maybe a minute and a half of I'm just getting dice out of a bag, which can feel a bit sort of
that's everyone expects that to happen. I think everyone would prefer that they can clearly see you're counting out the dice correctly and doing everything properly.
And also that the dice aren't completely obscured by their own iconography or whatever.
Yes, by their own very identity as transparent cubes.
Yeah, exactly.
When their only purpose is to be rolled and read. One of those purposes has failed.
Yeah, definitely. We should move on to another question, but the ongoing subject of event etiquette
basically,
is a really good one, I think.
Yeah.
Peter Fiona from Discord, with his 15th question in a row, writes in with,
Nice.
Greetings, Masters of the Lore Door. This month I'd like to ask you, is there a real issue with lore being changed? Lots of people seem to take a big issue with the relatively recent reworking of the Necrons from slaves of the Catan to bonkers cyber kings who've enslaved the Catan and generally have a lot more going on in their social calendars. Is it just classic internet overreaction, or does changing fairly large parts of the lore actually have any negative effects?
I don't mind lore retcons, and I don't tend to stress out about them. And I remember seeing, I think actually fairly recently, there was, perhaps a Games Workshop writer actually did like an AMA or a Q&A or something like that, where they talked about lore in terms of themes rather than historical events. And what you're trying to evoke is the theme of an army or the theme of a people, rather than trying to establish a kind of tapestry of historical happenings that all fiction must adhere to. And 40k always runs into this problem because it's 30 years of accumulated interlinked fiction, and there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be contradictions, and I think it's fine to move past those contradictions and actually say, is it cooler that Necrons are mad, insane king dudes rather than kind of slaves with no personality? Is that cooler? Then let's do that instead of the thing that was boring.
Yeah, I find this really interesting. This is a trend. Like, I also don't have a problem with it as long as it results in a more interesting theme or a more interesting thrust of the story. It's nice when things can be kind of linked together, because otherwise you don't have a story. Like, things have to have stakes, things have to kind of mean something. But things are allowed to change. There's like, obviously a retcon is one thing and an evolving story is another thing. So the two sides to this, maybe one of them is the Necron thing, which is genuinely a retcon. In some cases it's sort of, one of those things where it's sort of like the door is left slightly open. So if you want to do your own Necron army that are slaves of the Catan, that is possible within the law. So sort of like an obvious sideways shift designed to bring about a new way of telling those stories, but not completely incompatible with the old one. And then other things are things like the Primara Space Marines, right? The kind of like the change in the notion that new Space Marines can't be made, like, or new kinds, like the gene seed can't be perfected more, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that ties into the sort of worry about things changing. And I think stories should definitely be allowed to change. And to be honest, like, I would always prefer storytellers feel like they have the freedom to make changes if it's right for the fiction.
I mean, I miss the Wood Elves from the old world, for example, and I loved all the characters that were part of the Wood Elf faction. But I think the Sylvaneth are awesome, and there's loads of kind of cool, like, there's so much more visually inventive in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that they were allowed to grow into that, and like Wood Elves could become a thing still. I mean, of their own, if you wanted them to.
It's funny, like, there's a drive to systematize fiction, which I think is pretty fundamentally incompatible with art. Not to say that, like, Warhammer backstories are art necessarily, but, or even artistry, right? Like, the Horus Heresy novels needed the freedom to reinvent big chunks of the Imperium and add depth and humanity to them. One of the reasons that they are better as standalone novels than a lot of Warhammer fiction is because they have a lot more freedom to add characters like remembrances and things. They bring in all this interesting stuff. Because the freedom was afforded them to tell interesting stories, which is, again, maybe links back to something we were saying earlier. Like, but there is, I think, particularly in like, genre fiction or in kind of geek culture and things, a drive to like systematize more than, appreciate the kind of like, I don't know the best way to describe it, like sort of a bit more freeform, a bit less, more like analog storytelling where things are less bound to rules. Like, it's very much like a product of the last, maybe to put it's more of a books hat on than a wargaming hat on, but like, it feels like it's a very much a product of like the last century. Like, prior to, the kind of formal invention of science fiction and fantasy, almost all forms of, fiction was a lot looser. Like, and if you go back to, the origins of fantasy, if you take it back through Tolkien to Middle and Old English literature, then themes told and retold and kind of remixed and adapted in lots of different ways constantly. And I have to admit, like, I kind of suspect that there are probably generations of monks transcribing this stuff going like, actually, I think you'll find this didn't happen. Like, Lancelot didn't go there. At this time, he couldn't have done, he was here, but people don't forget that. People have forgotten that probably because it wasn't important.
Right. Like, yeah.
Like, and I see this everywhere now. Like, it's actually a real pet peeve of mine. Like, I think, as much as I like video games, I think video game language and logic has fundamentally hurt storytelling in some ways. Or like hurt how storytelling is received. Like, if you read like, discussions about, Star Wars or Marvel or stuff like, online, the language of video games, from things being overpowered or underpowered, or the sort of systemization of like action in action films, all comes down to this kind of weird like logic, like this desire to kind of categorize and find spaces for everything. And this definitely applies to Warhammer fiction as well. Yeah. Although it's maybe more applicable to Warhammer because it's literally derived from a game system. But I find that really kind of like, I want things to be able to be flexible, right? Like, I want things to be able to be surprising or kind of not, or subversive, or to undermine your expectations, which is what a good lore change allows you to do, right? Like, a good lore change allows you to come back to, I don't know, the Necrons. Like, Necrons went, and also there's always this hypocritical element. Necrons at one point in the early days of Rogue Trader were chaos androids. Right. Right? That, no one remembers, no one cares about that now, right? Like, things change, and like, and people come back to the idea and go, actually, that's dumb. What if they're mindless slaves to kind of our version of Lovecraftian old ones? And then people go, actually, that's kind of been done. What if they are, people whose the price of their uprising was too high, but they managed to enslave their own gods? That's more interesting. It just, like, it progresses as people kind of revisit the idea and make it better. Sorry, this has turned into a rant. But, like, basically, yeah, like, I think as a general rule, fans need to be more willing to let go of aspects of things and sort of entertain the benefits of change. What I'm saying is, change is good. Vote Zinch.
Vote Zinch. Every day. Yeah, you need to give new writers room as well. Like, one of the reasons why I think Spear of Shadows is the best AOS book I've read so far is that they're allowed to invent new types of character that aren't going to be models. They're just literally just people in between the models, in between the model ranges, and they could all become units, I suppose, but it's not the purpose of the thing. The purpose of the thing is to create cool characters and a cool universe to actually, with new ideas and new conflicts that you can buy into. And, that's kind of what fiction's good for. You want, interesting characters.
Like, I feel like, this is something I meant to mention earlier, actually. It's maybe slight tangent, but like, I feel like, games have actually become a bit more sensitive to how people kind of want to use their stuff and their factions and their stories rather than how they actually do, and a bit more sensitive to this. One thing that stood out to me from the Idoneth battle tome, which I really like, is, all of the references, apart from the War Scroll itself, there's loads of references in the book to Achillean queens. Right. There's no model for an Achillean queen, but it establishes that an Achillean queen is something that exists in the fiction that's the same as an Achillean king. And because there are plenty of female Idoneth bits, if you want to, make a kitbash a female, Achillean king for your army, it's supported by the fiction in the book. It's supported by the War Scroll. It's supported by all of the language that's used in that part of the book. Good. It kind of opens that, it keeps that door open in a way that doesn't need to then be kind of retconned when someone with a more, like a critical eye comes back to it later. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's good. Like, often these changes are just there to fix stuff that wasn't as interesting as it could be.
Yeah. It's not bad. I mean, what's really lost? When a retcon happens, what's really lost? You still had the pleasure of the fiction at the time. You still have the memories of engaging in that fiction. What's really gone away? You still have the memories of having a Wood Elf army and being in that old world, and now you can. I mean, I also felt the angst of it going away to an extent, but what really matters about that,
Yeah, I think nostalgia is a powerful draw for people. Yeah. People feel very anchored in, and I think, a pretty negative force in geek culture generally is a desire to recreate the conditions of the thing you loved when you were a teenager, rather than find a way of enjoying it as an adult, if that makes sense. And that's definitely a factor in Warhammer and in many other things. And I think it's not that that's necessarily unhealthy all the time, but like a lot of more recent or better storytelling comes when adults approach this stuff and go, actually, what is interesting about this? Because what you want when you're a teenager is very different. You know, like if that were the case, then every Warhammer book would just be about big Space Marine dreadnoughts punching things. And those books exist, and that's fine. You know, they should exist. But like again, to return to Horus Heresy, that's kind of a story that could have been told in a lot of different ways, and it's a surprisingly sort of mature and character focused story. I think as a consequence of it being a product of a mature fiction that then goes through its kind of juvenile phase and then has mature writers come to it and go, okay, let's pull out themes from this. Let's invest this with themes. Let's invest this with characters. And that's only a good thing. And if it challenges your understanding of the simpler stuff, then good. Basically.
Indeed.
Our final question comes from Drew, who writes, "Hi Tom and Chris. Oh no, what have I done? I've booked to attend both days of Warhammer Fest in May. I want to see the Golden Demon entries, but other than that, have I made a terrible mistake? Do you have any suggestions for a slightly more retiring individual attending 2 days of all the Warhams? Thanks for the good pods, Drew."
So we went for 1 day last year.
Yeah.
And I think we got as much as we were going to get out of it in that day. So I think to do more, you might want to play some games or something, or maybe join in some activities around there, I think.
I think also, like, so Rico Arena is a little bit out of the way, but it's not miles out of the way. I think, so not quite the same thing, but like I did like 3 days at Rezzed this year, and the games show. And the nice thing about having more time is you are not in a rush.
Yeah.
You don't have to book out your time quite so much. You can take it a little bit easier. It's a holiday, right? Like if you're booking out time to do this, it's a break from whatever it is you do the rest of the time. And if that's the case, then it's perfectly reasonable to like, you know, have a lie in on the second day or knock off early to go for a pint on the first day, like whatever, right? Like treat it as holiday time. I think there's a temptation to treat everything as work, to be like, okay, gotta see this, gotta do this. Sort of doing what you could do in a single day, but just slowly is actually, I think, quite nice. It's quite chilled out.
Especially with so many painting competitions around with the Golden Demon happening.
Yeah.
Could have spent some more time around those cabinets.
I think it's helpful if you've got like, you know, if you know some other people there, but like it does take the pressure off. I think there's the other way to say it is like it takes the pressure off tremendously.
Yeah.
Like, you know, pass out your time so that if you want to buy a particular limited edition thing, get there early. If you want to play the new thing, whatever that is, do that.
Yeah.
Whenever. But other than that, just like, you know, and if you get run out of stuff to do, you get bored, you're allowed to leave. That's the other thing. You can go do something else.
It's definitely worth chatting to the Games Workshop staff there. They're super nice. And you'll find loads of designers, including people who have been there for many, many years and actually probably responsible for many of the model ranges you've most loved. So it's definitely worth, even as a retiring person, like just, they're so polite and good that it'll be a nice chat. You'll have some nice chats. I predict.
Have nice chats.
Have nice chats with
and talk to people as well. That's the other
totally.
It's like everyone there shares something in common.
Absolutely.
And it's probably Warhammer.
You'd hope, and why else would you go there? You're a very good painter.
You live there, I don't know.
True.
But yeah, no, I think I'd have a good time. I'd go for 2 days if I could spare it.
Yeah. Maybe I'll get to go this year.
It's going to be a very busy minis month for the both of us, I think.
I think so.
But we'll be back at the end of May with presumably loads of news and reports from London GT.
Nice.
And you and I will actually probably play a 2,000 point game by then.
Yeah, hopefully.
You will have a Star Drake.
Yeah. Gonna get that dude finished. Star Drake Watch 2018.
Comes to an end. It's there now.
The watch is over.
If you keep watching it, that's weird.
Yep.
But yeah, if you'd like to send us a question for next month's episode, you can do so by emailing us at miniatures@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also find us on Twitter at minismonthly, and we each have miniatures-centric Instagram accounts.
We do.
What's yours, Tom?
I'm at Ludo Paints Minis. That's Ludo Paints Minis.
I'm at Exit Warp. That's EXITWARP.
Marvellous.
Thanks for listening, everybody.